Chapter 1184. Name: Why sure. Gender: male. Age: 20 years old. It was a sunny afternoon under the clear sky. This was the checkpoint before boarding the ship. After confirming the final information, the staff politely returned the document. "Sorry, sir. The verification has been a bit cumbersome recently." "It's okay. I'm used to it." The young man picked up his luggage and said goodbye with a smile. "Thank you. It's my job." The staff nodded. "I wish you a pleasant trip." The young man's expression seemed to become a little complicated. In the end, he just shrugged slightly. "I hope so." Soon, his figure disappeared behind the checkpoint. Looking at him, he seemed very familiar. Where have I seen him before? After a long time, the staff came back to his senses from the back of the figure. Seeing the unhappy expressions of the people waiting behind, he quickly smiled apologetically and sped up the process. In the end, when the long line gradually came to an end, the man sitting on the bench reading the newspaper slowly got up, walked to the checkpoint, and handed over his ticket. Looking at the ticket representing the royal suite on the top floor of the luxury cruise ship, the staff showed the warmest smile. "Welcome to the Turquoise, Mr. Leonid. On behalf of Doomsday Shipping, I welcome you. I hope you don't mind these procedures. It's all for safety." Andre waved his hand warmly. Under the guidance of the staff, he completed the fingerprint and facial recognition. In the middle, he put his finger into a slightly strange instrument and felt a slight pain. It seemed that he had taken a little blood. Such a complicated procedure, even as a business maniac who often flew around, was not used to it. "It seems to be very strict recently." He loosened his bow tie. "It's tight everywhere, making it hard to breathe. This is the request of the security department, and the instrument is also issued by them. To be honest, I don't know why it's necessary." The staff said helplessly. "However, the situation is not very good recently, so some people always like to take risks. We need to confirm the identity of every guest to ensure your safety. It better be like this." Andre sighed. Although ordinary people may not feel it clearly, they just felt that the pressure of work had increased a little compared to the past, and there were more restrictions in various aspects. However, for someone like Andre, he felt it even more clearly. As a tycoon, he could receive news from all sides. He could also feel that some kind of storm was reverberating at a higher level that he could not reach. Through the strange ups and downs of the international futures market, the strange movements of large financial groups, and the abnormal operations of various government departments, he could constantly sense the movements of the wind and the grass, but he could not see the body of the invisible force. There was nothing more unbearable than this. Every time he tried to investigate, he would only see a dense fog or receive a warning that made him extremely uneasy. Even the mysterious friend in the cigar club only smiled, indicating that he was at ease, but refused to tell him more. This made him more and more nervous. His cousin, who felt that he was a little crazy, simply helped him book a ticket and let him bring his daughter out to relax. Don't King deal with those numbers every day. After a long time, all your hair will fall off. When he thought of his daughter, his head hurt even more. She turned around and shouted, Lena, stop looking at those damn seagulls. Come here." "But, Dad, look." In the distance outside the railing at the edge of the dock, the girl holding a handful of breadcrumbs turned around and said, disappointedly, "They don't want to come over." "It's so strange." Far away from the coast, the bald thief birds that usually annoyed the sailors were not willing to come close at all. Instead, they scrambled to fly away from the dock. No matter how she called, they did not look back. It was as if they had smelled something terrible. The girl inexplicably thought. "I said, don't care about those seagulls." Andre urged, "Come here quickly." For the sake of the top-class ticket, the final security check was swift and quick. Soon, the two of them were able to board the ship. On the wide deck, the waiter had already served them drinks. Every smile was warm and considerate, but his daughter was not interested. "I don't like it here." She shook her father's arm. "Let's go back to the room." Andre was helpless. But when he thought of his wife's early death and how he was too busy with work to get along with his daughter, causing her to be so lonely, he felt even more guilty. He gently advised, "Dear, you can't stay at home every day, right? At your age, even if you don't linger around the various balls, you should at least try to have a boyfriend. This was what he was most depressed about. His family's condition wasn't bad. No, it should be said that his family had been wealthy since his grandfather. In his generation, he had achieved another leap in his family's wealth through his younger brother, who was in politics. And his daughter, who had perfectly inherited her mother's genes, could also be called a rare beauty. But she was not interested in men at all. Sometimes he even suspected that there was something wrong with his daughter's sexual orientation. But the key was that she did not even seem to have a particularly close friend. This made the old father very confused. "I have a boyfriend." Lena's eyes widened, and she emphasized, "I have many boyfriends." "Well, if they don't only exist in the phone, then that's even better. Remember to bring them to father when you have time." Andre shook his head and did not dwell on this issue. "There will be a banquet tonight. Come out and play like the other girls. I heard that there's a circus that has been very popular recently. You'll definitely like it. But I want to go back to the room to play activities." Lena glanced at her phone. "Tonight's guild war will be settled. At least eat something," Andre said seriously. "Okay." Lena sighed. Just as she was about to try and fight for a bit more, she saw her father's kind look. "Don't mess around, dear. The show is about to start. Look how cute Furry is." Along with the middle-aged man's words, a melodious melody sounded on the wide deck. Cute dolls of various colors sang and danced towards the passengers, giving them gifts. Their charmingly naive appearance attracted the attention of the children, causing the distressed children to stop screaming. The comical performance of stacking human pyramids and riding bicycles made the adults laugh and offer applause. There was also a cute kitten-like doll that came up. After a friendly interaction with Lena, it tied a cute bow on her hair. "How is it?" Andre looked at his daughter, who came back to take a picture with him, and smiled proudly. Just so." Although she awkwardly denied it, she still obediently accepted the doll's flyer with the gifts in her hands. She could vaguely see the words Kitten Paradise World Tour, and so on. Andre smiled slightly and did not expose her again. At this welcome banquet held on the deck, he saw a few familiar figures. These were faces that often appeared in the news in the circle. His instincts as an investor made him eager to try. Soon, using the atmosphere of the banquet, he had already integrated into their conversation. He even exchanged business cards with a few of them and became familiar with them. The girl next to him was so bored that she wanted to yawn, especially when there were a few guys around her who he could not see clearly with a little carelessness. They quickly surrounded her like flies smelling meat. It was as if they thought she was a little girl who had never seen the world. They approached her with some kind of empty and warm smile and started a topic that she was not interested in at all. However, because of etiquette, she could not walk away directly. And when they started to brag about their yachts and the wine in their family manner, she could only show an admiring expression of wow, oh, and that's amazing. However, most of them had some kind of unpleasant smell on them, like baboons in heat. This year's rainy season is short. The quality of next year's new batch of wine, the new product of the conference, American ports are tight, maybe Dom or Freeport. Oh, man. Maybe only the ones in the paper were good? She began to wander off. In a short trance, she seemed to fall into a sluggish state again, just like when she was a child. When she came back to her senses, she saw those smiling faces looking at her, as if waiting for a response after the performance. She should say something. Appreciation, envy, or admiration. She could say anything, they liked it. So, in the anticipation of the baboons, she showed a standard smile and opened her mouth to say something, but she heard a sharp sound suddenly burst out. It was right behind her. No, it was more like it was in the depths of her soul. It was like the scream of a whale. An invisible hand suddenly clenched her heart, causing her vision to turn black, and she found it difficult to breathe. The chill instantly penetrated her bones. But when she turned around in horror, she found that there was nothing behind her. There was only a huge container slowly being transported into the unfolded warehouse outside the ship's side. It was covered in a layer of pitch-black felt. It made her hair stand on end. "What is that?" She staggered back, unable to stand firm. "What?" The baboons looked puzzled. "That sound. What sound?" Every face was full of doubts, causing her to fall into a daze and panic. She felt as if everything in front of her was hidden behind a curtain, faintly revealing a mocking smile, causing her to gasp involuntarily. Here it comes again. Here it comes again. Those damn illusions at this time. I am sorry, excuse me. Lena staggered back a step and pushed away the people beside her. She did not have time to say hello and staggered forward, wanting to find her father. But her father had already gone too far. She could not catch up. When she wanted to shout, the hallucinatory screams sounded again, causing her to lose her strength. She leaned against the railing of the deck in a daze, slowly slid down, and sat on the steps. The crowd passed by her, looking at her lifeless appearance in confusion. Someone asked politely, but there was no response. She wanted to speak, but she could not make a sound. It was as if her consciousness was no longer in her body and was gradually drifting away. She was swept away by the waves of the screams, drifting with the waves. Gradually, she became cold and trembled. But in that suffocating feeling, as if she was about to drown, there seemed to be clear ripples spreading out. It made her involuntarily turn her head. She could not move her eyes away. Just behind her, in the afternoon sun, amidst the throng of tourists who were busy snapping pictures, laughing children ran among the adorable dolls. But there were more, surrounding the front of the deck. She stood on tiptoe curiously and looked up. They were no longer naughty or restless. Instead, they listened to the gentle melody in a trance. They stared at the silhouette leaning against the railing. The warm and gentle melody echoed in the sea breeze, as if it had once again rendered the dim world with color and brought warmth to the sun shining down from the sky. The sound of the cello soared out from the entanglement of the string and the bow, flying in the sky. It was like flying birds. Countless illusionary birds soared around her. She reached out and wanted to touch them, but the birds disappeared like bubbles. Only the children's singing filled the air around her. In the light melody of a nursery rhyme, the children's happy singing sounded. They participated in it in uneven tones, but it was as smooth as a stream. The singing echoed in everyone's ears under the clear sunlight. Ah, Edelweiss, Edelweiss, bloom in the morning to welcome me. Small and white, clean and bright, shake happily to me. She raised her head. As if she had finally floated out of the water, she looked at the light above the sky and gasped. She gradually fell asleep. It seemed that she had gone through a long nap, but it also seemed that it was only a short moment. When she woke up, the screams that echoed in the depths of her soul had disappeared. Like a real illusion, they disappeared without a trace, replaced by an unprecedented peace and quiet. Even her breathing became relaxed. Beside her, someone reached out and handed her a handkerchief. What a rare inspiration. It must have been hard for you these years. The young man comforted her softly. Don't worry, miss. You'll be fine. Lena looked at his face in a daze. She didn't know what had happened. She felt that it was like a dream. What happened to me? The strange man thought for a moment and smiled. I think you may just be a little seasick. Rest for a while will make you feel better. He paused and looked at the anxious man in the crowd in the distance who was looking around blankly. He told her, Your family is looking for you. You should go back. With that, he nodded and said goodbye. He picked up his violin case and turned to leave. Wait. Lena subconsciously wanted to get up, but she couldn't. Please wait a minute, The man looked back and waited in confusion. Lena was stunned. She found that she didn't know what to say. She just looked at the face that she had never seen before. After a long time, she realized that she had lost her composure. Sorry, may I ask you, what is your name? So the young man smiled. Why, sure. He took off his hat and bowed slightly. Please don't mind me. I am just a nameless musician. Just like that, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Only Lena was still sitting in the same place, staring blankly in the direction that he left. She felt that everything just now was like a strange dream. Maybe it was still her illusion. She couldn't tell. Lena? Lena, where did you go? When the anxious Andre found his daughter, he was almost crazy. Dear, are you okay? Can you hear me? Lena slowly turned her head and looked at her father. Father. Andre didn't understand. The girl pondered for a long time and suddenly asked, "When will the party start?" It was still early. Maybe she still had time to tidy up her hair and change into a new dress. She looked at the gradually dispersing haze in the sky. She suddenly began to look forward to it. Will we meet again? In the end, that person didn't appear at the party. Chapter 1185. She changed into the dress that her father bought for her. After rummaging through her luggage, she reluctantly found a set of jewelry that her father had casually stuffed into her luggage. Finally, she urgently called her cousin to ask for guidance on how to put on makeup. Thankfully, there was a cosmetic store on the cruise ship. In short, she used all the methods she could think of. Lena created a miracle. When the party started, the well-dressed girl almost glowed. She successfully attracted the attention of all the baboons present. Andre, the father, stood behind and watched this scene. He couldn't help but want to wipe away his tears. His daughter had grown up, but at the same time, he had an urge to buy a shotgun online. Let's see which little bastard dared to seduce his baby. Such a contradictory feeling of anticipation and uneasiness was really indescribable. Fortunately, his daughter seemed to be looking left and right the whole night and didn't pay attention to anyone's invitation at all. She didn't even bother to look at the buffet that she usually focused on. Until the end of the party, she returned to her room resentfully and didn't say anything. As a father, he had no idea what had happened. What else could have happened? The sister on the phone laughed like a goose. "Lena has grown up, and she likes a man." "You idiot." "Man? What man?" Half an hour after Andre hung up the phone, he clicked the button to buy a shotgun online for the 16th time. He couldn't wait to ask the other party to send his luxurious gold-plated double-barreled shotgun and 16 elephant hunting bullets to him through the helicopter today. Sharpening the knife, "Tell me, Kong, which reckless bastard dares to seduce my family's little cutie?" "Don't ask, Dad. It's none of your business." Every time he asked about the topic, the smile on his daughter's face would immediately disappear when she was distracted. She would become depressed and lie on the table or crawl under the blanket without speaking. For the next few days, the depressed girl almost went around the entire turquoise, but she still couldn't find the person she was looking for. Until she couldn't take it anymore and ran to the concierge to check the passenger list. "Why, sure." The staff member looked puzzled. After some searching, he turned the computer screen to show her. "Sorry, Miss Lena, this name isn't on the passenger list. On this voyage from the Russian Federation to America, there were only 4 Asian passengers, and the Mr. Huai you were looking for was not among them. Perhaps you've made a mistake somewhere." "No, that's definitely the name," Lena emphasized. "Also, bad thing, pregnant stone, and other syllables, you can look for them all." The staff member revealed an indescribable expression, as well as a flash of helplessness, which was clearly captured by Lena. This guy must know something. She took out the negotiation skills she had learned from her father and pressed on, refusing to let go. In the end, he finally pried open the lady's mouth. In fact, it wasn't that troublesome. Just by holding her arm and acting coquettishly, the lady who had a daughter of the same age as her began to waver. "All right, Miss Lena, I admit that I have indeed heard of this name." The manager sighed. "But you must have made a mistake, because if my memory is correct, the Mr. Weisher you mentioned is not a musician, but the chairman of the shipping company that this turquoise belongs to, Dombwa International Shipping Group." As she spoke, she took out a thick book from the cabinet. "If you're interested in this, we have a corporate culture booklet here. Maybe you can find what you want in it." "Forget it." Lena shook her head in frustration and turned away. She didn't even want to look. Dombwa? Shipping Group? Chairman? The image of a stooped old man in a robe was already in front of her. Was she mistaken to expect to find a stranger who she had only briefly spoken to in a corporate culture book? She even suspected that the existence of that person was her own illusion. There were too many illusions. The strange faces on the bark, the sharp laughter echoing in the cemetery, the resentful eyes occasionally seen in the reflection of the school's sink, and the strange shadows attached to others. She had long been accustomed to it. The psychiatrist told her that these were all her illusions. Because she was too young when her mother passed away, her mind was traumatized. Perhaps the The so-called name Huaishir was just her imagination after accidentally reading that booklet, together with a dreamlike encounter. The psychiatrist solemnly told her that once a similar situation occurred, she must contact the hospital for medication. But how could she go to the hospital in the vast sea? She could only lie on the sofa in the room and didn't even participate in the outside activities. She didn't want to see anything. Until she woke up from her sleep in the middle of the night, she suddenly realized, no, something was wrong. It should be said that it was not her that was wrong, but the ship. Ever since he boarded this ship, that strange feeling had been lingering in his mind. Now, the high-pitched whine that resembled the cry of a whale once again surfaced in his mind. Under the scarlet moonlight, she couldn't help but feel cold. Creepy. When the halo and illusion brought by the accidental encounter disappeared without a trace, recalling what she saw and felt along the way, she could only come to one conclusion. There was a problem here. But was this her imagination after her mind was traumatized, or was there a more terrible truth? She couldn't tell. She just instinctively wanted to ask her father for help. But when she didn't get a response after knocking for a long time, she opened the door only to find that her father was still snoring thunderously. No matter how she pushed, called, or even poked her fingertips with a needle, he couldn't wake up. Under the dim red moon, the middle-aged man turned over in his dream, the corner of his mouth raised into a smile that made Lena's hair stand on end. It was as if everything was perfect in the dream, so happy. In the dead silence, the girl fell into a daze, only to hear the nightmarish screams from afar sounded again. There was a low sound of footsteps gradually fading away from the door. The sound of clothes rubbing against each other was mixed with the sound, as if something heavy was being dragged. While trembling, Lena got up from the curled-up position and gathered her courage. No, I can't go on like this. The muddy moonlight shone through the window into the corridor. In the silent cruise ship, there was a deathly silence and coldness like a grave. Lena rubbed her arms, curled up in the corner, and quietly spied those charmingly naive, gentle, and cute dolls during the day. When night came, they walked stiffly, wandering in the dark cabins without light. There was only emptiness in her crystal-adorned eyes, as if they were patrolling, looking for any signs of life. But the security guards and sailors had all disappeared. The deck, the theater, the restaurant, and even the reception desk, the whole world seemed to have died, and she was the only living person who breathed out pale white fog. But looking at those strange and gloomy dolls, Lena couldn't help but suspect that she was going to follow in the footsteps of the others. She began to regret coming out. Perhaps it would have been better to stay in the cabin. But when the familiar screams came again, she couldn't help but tremble again. She trembled, but there was nothing she could do. In the vast sea, there was nowhere to go even if she wanted to escape. Only the cold moonlight was silently mocking her. When she finally gathered her courage and walked into the cabin, avoiding the patrolling dolls, and walked into the warehouse where the screams came from, she almost screamed when she saw a doll coming from the other side of the corner. A pink and tender teddy bear with a bow on its head was dragging a thick cloth bag behind it. It was almost walking towards her. Its charmingly naive face was covered in scarlet red, and sticky blood kept dripping from its body and the cloth bag in her hand. As if it sensed something, Bloodbear sniffed the lingering perfume in the air and looked around. But it didn't notice Lena hiding behind the table. The heavy footsteps left. Lena swallowed her saliva and looked at the bloody cabin door. Trembling, she walked up step by step. Through the gap, she saw the nightmare that she couldn't get rid of in her life. From the open container, under the restraint of countless chains, thick tentacles stretched out from the darkness, spasming, and huge mouthparts hissed, spreading out screams that no one could hear. In the midst of the blood, the dolls were holding chainsaws and all kinds of sharp blades, cutting the monster in the warehouse in an incomparably cruel way. The scarlet color spread, and as if it sensed something, a pair of eyes suddenly turned around and looked at Lena through the gap. Lena opened her mouth, wanting to scream, but soon she reacted and wanted to cover her mouth to stifle the scream in her heart. But there was a cold hand that reacted faster than her. It covered her face, pulling her back. Lena's heart instantly turned cold, and she trembled. She wanted to struggle and resist, but when she turned around, she felt like she was hallucinating again. She saw the face that she had been searching for these days. Chill. The man named Huai Shur hugged her, raised his finger, and put it in front of his lips. His dark eyes seemed to be shining with stars, and Lena was stunned on the spot. Calm down, Huai Shur whispered. After a long time, in the corner, Lena finally calmed down, and tears poured out uncontrollably. What's going on? How did it become like this? This is not the place to talk, madam. Huai Shur let go of his hand and took a step back. Come with me. Lena nodded vigorously, held the corner of his shirt, and followed behind him. She didn't say anything along the way, and just quietly wiped her tears, not because of fear, but because of the relief after the fear. Even just looking at his back, she felt a sense of security that she had never felt before. That's great. So I'm not the only one who noticed that there was a problem here. So I'm not the only one facing all of this. No, he must be here because of this to save an innocent like me. There's hope for everything. Just like that, she followed Huai Shur all the way forward, pushed open the door, passed through the corridor, and walked into the warehouse with familiar ease. She brushed past the puppet, watched him wave to familiar companions, and then pushed open the office door. Wait, Greet. Her footsteps stopped. She froze. Why aren't you walking? The smiling man turned around and asked in confusion, Are you okay? In the wash of the waves, the lights flickered, and the shadows on his face were drawn out. His smile was so strange. When the sound of footsteps came from all around, and when the ferocious and gloomy puppet appeared at both ends of the corridor, Lena's heart completely froze. They were in cahoots. Chapter 1186. All right, it doesn't matter here. Huai Shur shook his head and sighed. Although he didn't know why she didn't move, they were already in front of his office. It was about time for him to explain. I think you should have some too. What answered him was a piercing scream and begging for mercy. Help! The innocent girl curled up in a corner and screamed, Don't kill me! Huai Shur was stunned for a long time and said helplessly, Calm down, madam. There's no one else here. No matter how loud you shout. The girl became more and more desperate. It's over. It's all over. She was brought into a tiger's den by him. Next, she would be locked up and treated cruelly. She would forget about the outside world and become his pet to relieve his boredom. Wait, I can't think about it anymore. She looked at the warm and gentle face and began to feel that this was not a bad outcome. Lena, how can you be so depraved? I want to die with you. The girl cried and screamed at Huai Shur and herself in despair. She rushed forward and waved the table knife wildly. It made one's eyes hurt just by looking at it. That would only injure himself. Then, under the mocking laughter of the dolls, she was easily suppressed by a hand. With a slight shake, the sharp table knife hidden in her sleeve fell out of her hand. Madam, you may have misunderstood something. We are a legitimate company. Huai Shur began to feel bald. Maybe you have some misunderstanding about us. Liar. You still want to lie to me. Lena pointed angrily at the pink bear that had just returned. I saw it. It was covered in blood. It had killed someone. This. Huai Shur and the pink bear looked at each other and helplessly glared at this unreliable guy. The pink bear spread his hands. Brother, didn't you say you would solve it? No, the key now was not how to comfort her. It was how to prevent the secret on this ship from being leaked by a child who accidentally saw it. Because of her hyperceptive sense, if he didn't want to use the automatic lead to brainwash her, he could only use his own brain. Huai Shur, do your best. Believe in yourself. Cough, cough, you misunderstood. It's paint. Huai Shur answered frankly, That's the red ink for tomorrow's magic show. It's mild, not stimulating, and will go away after washing. It won't hurt your eyes and skin. If you don't believe me, take a look. As he spoke, he pulled out a short knife, as if by magic. Blood slowly dripped from the crow, feather blade. Following her own movements, she casually aimed at Huai Shur's body and stabbed him twice. After pulling out the blade, there was no wound at all. The girl's eyes widened. Look, it's basically a magic prop. Huai Shur shrugged. Besides, if I had any feelings for you, why would I explain so much? Lena was in a daze, and even the tears that fell gradually became awkward. Fake. Yes, it's fake. Huaisha nodded. That's not right, then. Why are they all so strange? Lena persisted in asking. It's so late, and they're still running around outside. There are chores after the show, and they have to be cleaned up. Huaisha sighed. Otherwise, if they're cleaned up, how can they continue the show tomorrow? Why do you have to wear a puppet costume to clean up? This is called professionalism. Huaisha answered solemnly and said loudly, the staff can never take off their puppet costume in front of customers. Otherwise, once the children see that the character they like is played by a human, wouldn't their dreams be shattered? Not only can it not be taken off during the day at 39 degrees Celsius or late at night below 0 degrees Celsius. Even if you have high blood pressure at 30 years old, can't walk at 40 years old, and only have 4 hours of rest per day during peak periods, and are in a state of long-term malnutrition and subhealth, as long as there is a second person present, you must never show any flaws. This is the work principle that our kitten paradise is proud of. Lena looked at him blankly. She felt that what he said was so reasonable that she was speechless. How could this person say such heartless words so seriously? But soon, she noticed the problem again. She was alert again. Why did you cover my mouth and bring me here? Huaisha raised his wrist expressionlessly and showed her the time. It's 1 o'clock in the morning now. It's time to rest, madam. The staff on shift are already asleep. Everyone has to get up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning to prepare for work. If they are woken up by you now, they will scold you. What about everyone? Lena looked around. Where did everyone go? They're all in their rooms, including the sailors. There's no one outside right now. Huaisha directly took out his mobile phone and showed her the storm warning on the screen. It has been broadcasted many times during the day, and there are rolling notifications on TV. Extreme weather effects. For safety, everyone will not go out after dinner unless necessary. If you need help, you can call the service department. With that, he directly dialed the number. In the calm greeting of the service department staff, Lena stared blankly at the screen. Did she really think too much? No, it's all a lie. She suddenly trembled and recalled the key point. Who are you? The passenger list. Your name is not on the passenger list. I was registered as a staff member when I boarded the ship, madam. Huaisha calmly pulled out his badge. Under the Kitten Paradise logo, his head picture and name swayed with his fingertips. You have to sell tickets to take the ship. I don't have to spend a cent on the ship, and they have to pay me. Then what about the monster? The girl asked in a trembling voice. The thing in the warehouse. The monster. I saw it clearly. The corner of Huaisha's eyes twitched, and he glared at Pink Bear fiercely. How the F***ck could this be seen by others? Pink Bear continued to spread his hands with an innocent face. I don't know what you're talking about. Cough, cough. That monster. It's strange to say. Why would that monster appear here? He huffed and puffed, racking his brains, and suddenly patted his head. Yes, it's just like what you saw. Actually, he hammered his palm and said firmly, this is a prop that our Kitten Paradise specially ordered from the Russian Federation. A prop? Lena repeated sluggishly, in disbelief. She felt as if she had been miserably deceived, but he said it so seriously. Should she believe him? Yes, a prop. Huaisha replied in a trembling voice, with a worried face. Don't tell others. Recently, the infighting in the industry has been very scary. For the customer experience and the new venue, our Kitten Paradise specially sent mechanical monsters from Rome to the Monster Paradise in Las Vegas. The custom-made version is 200 meters long, 61 meters high, 61 meters long, 61 motors. The whole body can move, and it also supports post-modification. There are 6 different forms, and it comes with its own sound system. It is a technology of the next era to bring players an immersive experience. It can also transform. What you saw just now was us testing the mobility of a new monster, right? He glanced at Pink Bear and the fat dog next to it. The 2 plushies immediately nodded frantically. For a long, long time, in a long silence, Lena looked at the 3 of them suspiciously. Finally, she looked at Huaisha with a very sincere expression that said, You must believe me. Just like Godzilla? Huaisha gritted his teeth and nodded. Something like that. As soon as he finished speaking, he regretted it because the girl's eyes lit up, full of curiosity. Then, can I see it? In the silence, there was a snort from under Pink Bear. The fat dog had already curled up in the corner and was laughing so hard that it hit the ground. Only Huaisher struggled to maintain a warm smile, squeezing out a gentle voice from between his teeth. Of course you can. 2 minutes later, in the brightly lit warehouse, Huaisher led the girl through the heavy door and walked to the front of the open container. Under the shackles of the heavy chains, the hideous and ugly monster with countless tentacles, as Huaisher said, was simply a prop that could not move at all after the power was pulled out. But the lifelike exterior had vicious eyes and huge mouth parts, as if they were going to devour people, which made the girl a little scared. It stinks. Lena covered her nostrils. Why is the smell so strong? This is called professionalism. Huaisher's smile twitched, and he explained solemnly. In order to simulate a realistic simulation, we used various fragrances to piece together the smell. You know that the fragrance of jasmine is actually similar to feces. He casually pulled out a tentacle and showed it to the girl. Look, at first glance, it looks scary, but it's actually completely made of medical silicone material. Through the small holes on it, liquid will be squeezed out, perfectly simulating the touch of marine life. It's warm to the touch. That's right. We use the latest technology to keep it warm and moisturize, pursuing the highest degree of simulation. Afraid that she would not believe him, Huaisher fumbled in his pocket for a long time, took out his game controller, and pressed the prop in the box. Look, it can even breathe. The prop was stiff and did not respond. In a short silence, Huaisher pressed the button of the controller and pressed it again. Sorry, maybe the signal is bad. He smiled, glanced at the monster, and finally emphasized each word with his words. It can also breathe. As if it had finally received the signal, the huge prop monster suddenly spewed out a stinky, wet, and hot wind from the central mouth part like a fountain. For a moment, Lena was stunned and couldn't help but clap. Wow, so realistic, isn't it? Huaisher nodded. It has a lot of functions. Look, it can even blink. As he said that, he pressed the controller again. And so, the prop began to blink crazily. And the frequency was so high that it was touching, as if it was afraid that something would happen if it blinked too slowly. It caused the girl to cheer and exclaim. After experimenting with waving tentacles, turning over, crawling, and other functions, the girl who feasted her eyes finally asked curiously, with such a big body, could it do a handstand? There was a sudden silence. The prop was silent. Huaisher was also silent. After a long time, he slowly turned his head and smiled encouragingly at the prop. It can try. Half an hour later, the performances of handstands, somersaults, can-cans, boxing, and cat meowing were finally over. After trying all kinds of unexpected possibilities of the prop monster on behalf of Kitten Paradise, the satisfied girl finally put down the controller and followed Huaisher on the way home. As for what happened in the warehouse after the door behind them closed, it was no longer important. The signs of storm were obvious. The thunder in the distance gradually approached. The huge cruise ship was constantly bobbing in the waves, and the low sound of the wind could be heard outside the porthole. But on the ship, it was peaceful and calm. The two of them talked and laughed along the way, talking about relevant topics. Angelina, Lena finally remembered and said seriously, Mr. Huaisher, my name is Angelina. It's a name for a beauty. Huaisher smiled and praised. It seems that you are very interested in classical music. Of course. Classical music, I like it so much. There's so many classic songs. For example, the girl racked her brains and her eyes lit up. Majestic. Ah, that's true. Huaisher nodded. After all, so much time has passed and so many composers have saved up. There must be something suitable for you. By the way, I like both pomp and circumstance. The girl who was exposed hid her expression awkwardly, but saw Huaisher behind her stop in place. He sent her to the hall at the entrance of the cabin. He didn't move forward. It's getting late. Miss Angelina, you should go to rest. In the thunder in the distance, he smiled and said goodbye, Although it's not a good time to take a walk, tomorrow will definitely be the good day. Angelina stood in place with a sense of loss. She wanted to say something, but stopped. She mustered up her courage and called out to the musician, who turned around and left. "Why, Mr. Whisher?" She pinched the corner of her pajamas and asked nervously. "Although it's a little abrupt, can you play the piano again?" She hesitated and said, "For me, not far away." The musician was slightly stunned, as if he didn't expect it, but soon a gentle smile appeared on his face. "Of course, Mississippi." He sat on a chair in the hall and opened the piano case. After a moment of contemplation, he took a light breath and lowered his eyes. In the calm before the storm, a low melody sounded again, just like the afternoon sun shining on everything. Under the illumination of the crystal chandelier, everything became gentle again. The mist-like melody was dense and spread. In the girl's eyes, there seemed to be a light slowly rising, illuminating everything. The ancient melody embraced the soul, soothed all the wounds, and completely dispelled the lingering illusions and unbreakable nightmares. Even the thunder that was gradually approaching and the lightning that kept falling in the distance was no longer frightening. In this gloomy ocean, in the small cruise ship, no matter where they were, those sleeping people gradually fell into tranquility. As if returning to their long-lost hometown, they smiled and embraced their own dreams, no longer afraid and no longer hesitated. Under the gentle light, even the turbulent waves and the heavy rain falling from the clouds couldn't dispel this eternal peace. And just outside the hall, in the gradually raging storm, those charmingly naive dolls were still walking on the deck. Sticky blood seeped out from the cloth bag behind them, and soon it was washed away by the heavy rain. In this way, accompanied by their agile movements, the stinky blood collected and the dismembered limbs in the cloth bag were poured into the sea. The scarlet gradually spread, inextricably linked with the tide into the distance. When the thunder burst out from the sky, the fleeting thunder illuminated the gray sky and the dark sea. Amidst the shattered reflection of the ocean, countless fleeting and strange shadows rapidly condensed and emerged from the curtain of rain. The precipitates of hell that had seeped into the present world through the sealed cracks. The monsters and nightmares that were catalyzed by calamity were continuously crawling out of their lairs under the temptation of blood and sacrifices. Attracted by the bait, they flew toward this place. Now, countless monsters hissed and hovered between the sea and the sky. Then, in the dark clouds, they glimpsed a solemn outline that they had never seen before in their lives. A pipe organ was played. Countless reeds and brass pipes trembled, bursting out vast and desolate syllables, in accordance with the rhythm of the cello, echoing the small and gentle melody on the cruise ship. They resonated with each other, with the steel shell of the Nautilus playing the melody representing the storm. The power from Yun Zhongjuan turned the entire sea and sky into a stage. When the behemoth swimming in the dark clouds began to sink, countless thunder and lightning outlined a strict shadow. Amidst the torn clouds and the leaping lightning bolts, countless steel wings slowly unfurled. A large group of crows wearing the mask of iron crows sat on the deck of the Nautilus. They soared in the storm and thunder, looking down coldly. The shadows of the monsters were reflected in their pitch-black eyeglasses. With the mighty sound of the organ, blood-stained blades were pulled out of their sheaths. Holy! A hoarse praise sounded from under the mask. At that moment, endless iron light tore the stormy night apart. The hunt began. Chapter 1187. When the sun rose the next day, the cruise ship was once again bustling with noise and excitement. Last night's thunder and rainstorm did not cause any trouble to the guests. Instead, it cured the insomnia of several passengers, and everyone seemed to have had a good dream. Even the most serious and demanding people couldn't help but smile when they woke up. When this beautiful night was over, no one noticed that something was wrong, except for Andre, who was stuffed into the closet by his daughter in a panic last night. By the way, Angelina had completely forgotten about it after she came back. She slept until 12 o'clock at noon. When she got up, she heard the sound from the closet. Unfortunately, it was not an invitation from Narnia, but the roar of her father. For a whole day, Andre was trying to find out why he had gone to sleep in the cupboard and locked it from the inside. In this regard, Miss Lena, of course, said that she didn't know anything. She also tried to attribute the reason to sleepwalking. However, looking at his daughter's evasive manner, Andre already had a rough idea in his heart. But what else could he do? As long as he could see his daughter smile again, he would rather live in the closet every day. This small episode could not affect Mr. Andre's happy mood. Even during this leisurely vacation, he still made use of the opportunity to reach preliminary cooperation with several new friends in the Roman bathroom and the opera hall box. His daughter was also much more lively than before, no longer lingering between mobile phone screens and pieces of paper. Even the shotgun he bought online was delivered to him in an urgent manner. His career, family, and personal strength had all improved. As a middle-aged man, was there anything more pleasant than this? The answer was yes. For example, in the following journey, he finally confirmed who the little bastard who dared to seduce his daughter was. Why, sure. Behind the fence, Andre, who had changed into a large flowery shirt and wore sunglasses, pretending to be a passerby. He quietly poked his head out and looked at the young man who was chatting happily with Lena on the front deck. His shotgun was already thirsty for blood. Her gnashing of teeth successfully scared the little kid who was blowing bubbles next to her, causing everyone to look at her in astonishment. After the initial anger and doubt, Andre felt an unprecedented sense of defeat. That little bastard really did have a face that made people feel ashamed of themselves. No wonder Lena fell for him. For a moment, he actually had a feeling that it wasn't too bad. Apart from Lena, he didn't have any other children, nor did he have any intention of remarrying. The money and assets he had earned over the years were enough for her to live a carefree life after his death. This gigolo was not bad-looking and had a sweet mouth. He seemed to know how to play the cello. It was not bad to be able to make her daughter happy every day. As for his character, reality wasn't a soap opera, and he wasn't an incompetent old father who only knew how to rage when the two of them couldn't be together. As long as they were in the Russian Federation, she had plenty of ways to make him a good husband. Even if it was fake, wouldn't it be real if she pretended for a lifetime? Unfortunately, he realized that he was overthinking things. His daughter, on the other hand, had such intentions. However, the other party seemed to have maintained a polite distance. How could a musician from a wandering circus not be interested in a rich young lady who was ignorant of worldly affairs? Either he was an ignorant liar who relied on his face to make a living, or there was a problem somewhere. Andre's heart gradually sank. As a decent middle-aged man with good morals and education, although he was extremely worried about this, he still didn't easily intervene. On the one hand, he hoped to leave a good memory for his daughter. On the other hand, he also hoped to find out more. Even though he was wandering around the cruise ship every day, through his secretary, private detective, and many partners, the investigation of Mr. Huaisher had already begun in full swing. Then, he welcomed the results. Nothing was found. Huaisher, male, 20 years old, from Dongxia, a registered ABRSM professional cellist. He could be said to be young and promising. After rejecting the invitation of the Dongxia Philharmonic Orchestra, he worked in the performance department of Kitten Paradise and was engaged in touring performance work. Then there was nothing. Even a resume was not enough. The 2 lines above were already the limit of what he could investigate. Background? Family? Financial situation? Medical history? Bank credit rating? When it came to the details of the individual, everything was hidden in the fog. During this process, what made him feel even more horrified was the Kitten Paradise that he originally thought of as a wandering gypsy group. What was the experience of fishing and catching Godzilla? This was the experience. If he didn't investigate, he wouldn't know. It was funded by 2 banks with deep backgrounds in Dongxia and America. It was registered in Las Vegas, America. It had an inextricable relationship and cooperation with the Ancient Travel Group. In less than a year since it was born, it had prepared built and opened super large amusement park facilities in Jingdu, in Hangzhou, Las Vegas in America, Ingtian Prefecture in Dongxia, Paris and Rome, and other places. Its influence had spanned several fields, from the entertainment industry to the manufacturing industry. And the actual controller behind it was actually an investment department that had just been established by an unknown independent university. What kind of F***king group was this? What was even more unbelievable was that, as a financial practitioner, he was unaware of this. This was no longer in the category of ridiculous. No matter where it was, it could only be described as evil. There was a problem. There was definitely a F***king problem. It wasn't that he didn't try to sound out the cute dolls that could be seen everywhere on the ship, but other than the predetermined lines, he couldn't get anything else out of their mouths. From start to finish, not a single one of them took off their hoods to reveal their faces. And there was only one person in charge on this ship. So who was this person? Wasn't this a coincidence? It was Huaishur. Now, the old father looked at the little bastard with a complicated expression. He didn't even know what he should be feeling. Finally, at the end of the journey, after an accidental encounter, Mr. Andre finally chose to take the initiative to talk to him. The piano player who played the piano on the deck every afternoon also didn't refuse the invitation to have a drink with him at the bar. On the surface, the two could be said to be having a good conversation. He wasn't as frivolous and incompetent as he thought, nor was he as shrewd as he thought. His bright and cheerful smile was like a spring breeze. Even if he used the harshest filter to look at him, Andre had to admit that this was a very outstanding young man who would definitely achieve great things in the future. But his heart sank to the bottom. Cellist? Who was he kidding? If all the cellists in the world were at this level, classical music would have already ruled the world. Why would people worship gods, Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven? Then, which big trust group's commercial spy? A secret agent with a secret mission? Or a member of Mercury? It couldn't be that the chairman of the Doomsday group, who never appeared in public, was just fishing for fun, right? Thousands of worries gathered in his heart, and he couldn't help but sigh silently. And next to him, a freshly mixed cocktail was silently placed in front of him. "This drink is on me." The cellist who stood behind the counter and replaced the bartender smiled. "With all due respect, the worry on your face is about to overflow. If there's anything that's worth worrying about, feel free to say it. It's not good to keep it in your heart." Andre picked up the glass and smelled the amazing flavor he had never tasted before. After a long time, he couldn't help but shake his head with a bitter smile and drink it down. "Well, as you said, I think I'd better be honest. Please forgive me for being presumptuous." He put down the glass, looked at the smiling face, and asked solemnly, "Young man, who exactly are you?" "That's not important, Mr. Andre." Huaishur shook his head and poured him another glass. "For you, I'm just a passing musician. There's no need to worry about it. Please enjoy your trip. I promise there won't be any problems worth worrying about." Looking at the middle-aged man's hesitant look, Huaishur wiped the snow pot and glass and said calmly, "I can see that there are doubts in your heart, as well as the worries of a father. But please rest assured, this is just a small episode in the journey. There will only be beautiful memories left, and it's not worth worrying about." The calm words echoed in his ears, but it brought an indescribable sense of relief, and the anxious middle-aged man gradually relaxed. And finally, from the other end of the table, a business card was pushed over. "Your daughter has some outstanding potential, so she needs to face some troubles that others won't face. But after the situation stabilizes, there shouldn't be similar problems in the future." Before leaving, the musician told him, "If one day you feel confused and want to ask for help, you can contact this number." Andre, who was gradually drunk, couldn't remember what happened next. He leaned on the bar and fell asleep. When he woke up again, the port in the distance was already in sight. 2 tugboats equipped with fire cannons sprayed out 4 gorgeous water curtains in front of the cruise ship, welcoming the upcoming guests. But the turquoise didn't stop. This was not their scheduled docking location. Only one cargo ship slowly approached, and with the help of a crane, it took a container from the warehouse. Another ship without any logo sent another performance team up and took away the team from the Kid in Paradise, together with the musician. Just as he said, this was just an episode in Andre's trip. It might be beautiful, but it would eventually be far away. Just before stepping on the ship, the young man seemed to have noticed the gaze behind him. He turned back with a smile and held the brim of his hat. This was the final farewell. On the edge of the ship, Andre, who watched him leave, couldn't help but sigh. It was like watching a free bird disappear at the end of his sight. A sense of disappointment and envy arose in his heart as he wondered why he couldn't fly. "What is that?" Lena looked at the business card in his hand and seemed to be curious. "Contact information?" "No." Andre shook his head and looked down at the white tower logo on the business card, as well as the line of numbers. His expression was complicated. "I guess this is a university? It sounds worth the effort." Lena smiled. "It's still early." Andre ruffled her hair in annoyance. "No matter who it is, don't even think about taking my little cutie away from me. Wait, child, the next time I see him, I must let him know the power of the Russian Federation boxing." "Forget it, Dad." The girl shook her head helplessly and glanced at her father. "Wait until you can take a monster dozens of meters tall as a toy for a little girl who has never seen the world." "Monster?" Andre was confused. "What monster?" Under the bright light of the setting sun, the girl smiled and blinked. "Well, it's a secret." Chapter 1188. The unmarked cargo ship did not go to the bustling cities of America. After a short replenishment at the port, it turned around and embarked on another route. Half a day later, it followed the coastline and arrived at Mazarin. In the middle of the night, on the desolate port, there were already people standing in the cold sea breeze for a long time. When they saw Huaisher walk down the ladder, they raised their hands and saluted. The reception team from the Central Bureau was already in place. "Welcome, Mr. Huaisher." "Thank you." Huaisher nodded and shook hands with the receptionist. "Thank you for your hard work." Behind them, under the illumination of the spotlights, the blood-stained container was lifted up again. A staff member covered in protective clothing walked into the container under the protection of the soldiers. Soon, he came out and waved to the people below. Soon, a message was sent over. The seal was confirmed. It was in good condition. The loss was negligible. The person who took over immediately beamed with joy. After all, such precious material was still rare. Before it was completely scrapped, it must be used as long as possible. "May I ask if there was any danger along the way?" The person who took over hesitated for a moment and asked in a low voice, "Did the seal cause any hidden dangers?" "No." Huaisher handed over the mission brief in his hand. He glanced at the half-dead monster and nodded in satisfaction. "We get along pretty well." Suddenly, the huge monster in the container shrank into a ball. It couldn't stop trembling. The researchers clicked their tongues in wonder. These things were originally the front line of the War of the Worlds. The super-large aberrations that Doomsday fished out from the deep sea were natural. Needless to say, they didn't have brains at all. Often, they would only go crazy to destroy or spread pollution. No matter how many cages they were put in, no matter how many lessons they were taught, they wouldn't learn anything. And like this, when the two sides were carrying out an open-air handover, once they noticed that the seal was loose, these unruly monsters would definitely enter a state of restlessness and madness. It was not like now. It was like kindergarten students going home with their parents after school. They couldn't wait to carry the container and run away overnight. "What on earth did you do to it?" "Oh, isn't it better to have a friendly discussion and ask it to be quiet and help a few more times?" Huaisher smiled and gave a positive comment. "It's not as bad as people say. Don't be misunderstood by stereotypes. It was actually very obedient. It ate 2 meals a day and pooped once. After it pooped, it would obediently eat again. It didn't cause much trouble. With the bait on its body, they managed to capture quite a number of mist spirits and mutated creatures that had seeped out of the rift a few days ago. The cleaning efficiency has increased a lot." Before anyone could react to the massive amount of information in his words, behind him, the dolls from the theme park had already walked down with huge boxes and tossed the items in front of the recipients. That jaw-dropping amount piled up into a small mountain. Scarlet crystals were still leaking out of the chests that were randomly picked up or put together. They fell to the ground and made cracking noises. It illuminated a sea of dazed faces. Those were the final crystals formed from extreme pain and despair under the purification of death. I seem to have kept some of these things in my group as snacks. There's no use in having more. Just pass them on to the American branch of the Command Bureau for me. Huaishur smiled generously. Perhaps for others, these were precious and rare alchemy materials and raw materials. But for the current Huaishur, they were just byproducts of the hunt. With a casual rub of two hands, there were too many to hold. In the next few days, after Nautilus's warehouse was full, Huaishur was too lazy to get any more. There would be too much residue, even if they were directly thrown into a boiler and burned. And thanks to this operation, on the route chosen by Huaishur, 4/5 of the deep nests ushered in a disaster. Who knew how many mutated creatures' parents went out for the smell of meat but never came back, leaving empty nests and orphans to be fed? And by the time those orphans grew up to be a threat again, it would be at least 4 or 5 years later. Without waiting until then, someone would probably come to their door and scatter their ashes together. Big cleaning. This was what the executors called this operation that covered the entire present realm. It was just like in the past. At the end of the year, the whole family always had to wash up, sweep the floor, wipe the windows, and clean the dust on the top of the cabinet to celebrate the new year. It was the same for the entire present realm. Under the influence of the increasingly torturous and intense War of the Worlds, even with the existence of the border defense line, there was still a large amount of hell precipitation and thin disasters that were pushed by the deep tide and seeped into the present realm. Admittedly, compared to the pressure faced by the border defense line, it was not worth mentioning. But after years of accumulation, bad signs had gradually emerged. Many areas and creatures had shown signs of aberration. In areas where there were few people, there were even reports of large groups of embryonic forms. Of course, such a small problem was still far from truly endangering the operation of the present realm. But they couldn't wait until Rome was frozen to start cleaning up, right? They had to prepare for a rainy day. Therefore, under the coordination of the general administration and the major pedigrees, after a few months of preparation, a new round of cleaning up campaign was set off in the entire present realm. In addition to eliminating evil from the endless illegal cults, they also had to protect the safety of the city and maintain the ecological environment. To be honest, Huaishur was actually very interested in the first one. If it didn't work, the second one will be fine too. However, as Yin Zhongjuan, who was the best at regulating the environment, he was really suitable for the task of maintaining the ecological environment. In addition, most of the pedigrees in the present realm were very touched by Nautilus's entry application and rejected it without hesitation. What are you doing, stinky brother? This is the present realm. Don't mess around. The present realm was not the border or hell, and Huaishur was famous for being a lunatic who didn't care about anything when she got high, coupled with a strategic weapon like the Nautilus. When the time came, a casual shot from her would probably set off the entire realm's alarm. It couldn't be helped. Now, he had enjoyed the same treatment as part of the Tier 5. Once he returned to the present realm, even if he took a few steps out of Dombois, it would cause countless problems. This directly led to the fact that, in the end, there were only a few places in the Pacific Ocean for him to choose from. Since he was on a sweep, why not sweep his own sea route? He could also take a vacation while he was at it. Anyway, he didn't intend to get involved in the affairs of the present realm during this period of time. He just wanted to take on a mission to kill some time during his short vacation. In this way, he took the bait distributed by the general administration and circled the high seas. He traveled during the day and worked at night. To be specific, he relied on the strong vitality and regenerative ability of the monster to chop off a few pieces from its body with an axe and throw them into the sea. Under the temptation and attraction of the disaster aura, the newly formed mutants couldn't resist at all. The newborns within a few thousand nautical miles would fall into a frenzy and instinctively chase after the turquoise. Then, they would be sent away by the sharpened crows. The origin substance left behind would be directly calcined into crystals, and the remaining body parts wouldn't go to waste. It wasn't easy for the monster to bleed every day, so he chopped them up to nourish its body. After following Huaisher all the way, not only did it not lose weight, it gained a few hundred kilograms of weight. Ignoring the shadow in its heart that no one cared about, it could be said that it had made a small profit. Unfortunately, good times always pass quickly, and it was time to say goodbye again. Although Huaisher was quite reluctant to part with it, seeing the monster almost cry with joy, he couldn't help but feel a sense of defeat. He had thought that everyone's relationship was quite good. After arriving at your new home, you have to listen to Mom and Dad. After he smiled and rubbed the dog's head one last time, the container closed again and everything disappeared into the darkness. The container, suspended by the crane, slowly landed on the heavy truck in the middle of the convoy. Next, it would continue its duties on another team. The convoy, formed by the Ascendants and the American Legion, would majestically pass through the captured wilderness of North America and spend 4 months to complete the preliminary sterilization and pest control work. At the same time, there were hundreds of teams with similar missions in the entire territory. After several years of sterilization and pest control, a more detailed report would be uploaded to the decision-making room and become a reference for a new round of operations. The second phase of the project would target the dark areas that were prone to disasters and the land of evil spirits to further eliminate. It would be the third phase, the fourth phase, no blind spots or gaps, and finally the long and busy final phase, and this was all Huaisher could do. His vacation time was over. After the convoy set off, he also took a special car arranged by the Federal Bureau, left Mazarani, and went deep into the Chihuahuan Desert along the ancient road. After traveling through the wilderness covered with tumbleweeds for 6 hours, he came to the inner part of the desert, in front of a crystal cave that could be seen everywhere. Under the gloomy sky, the receptionist with a heavy headscarf had been waiting for a long time in the sandstorm. In the roar of the wind, he walked up against the strong wind, compared the photo on the information, and shouted to the person in the car, "Name, forget it. Let's eat less sand. Don't do this. You have to hurry, sir. The direct line of the Bifrost will open in 3 minutes. Those guys up there are too good at timing. If you miss this wave, you'll have to wait for another 2 weeks. Don't say anymore. I like your simple way of doing things." Huaisher was almost moved to tears. After waiting for so many years, he could finally fast forward. After trekking a few dozen meters in the storm, he followed the receptionist into the cave. Waiting for him was a mining elevator that had been around for a few years. When he pulled the switch, in a low roar, the steel cable that extended to the deepest part of the cave began to rotate, and the old elevator shook off a burst of rust and dust. From the deepest part of the mine, a cold and turbulent wind blew. "I wish you a safe journey, sir." When Huaisher walked in, the receptionist struggled to pull the almost rusted gate and hung a big lock on it. Finally, he hit the button. In the loud roar, Huaisher ushered in a sudden weightlessness. In the gradually mournful wind, he fell into the depths of the darkness with the entire old elevator. The fall seemed to be endless. In the sparks from the friction between the countless steel cables and the old elevator, he could see the rough and ancient rock walls gradually change and become transparent. In the end, there was nothing around him, as if he had been thrown into the dark universe. The depth was changing violently, causing the crude elevator to wail incessantly. Until a moment later, the rainbow came roaring. The darkness disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a faint wind and scorching sunlight. Under the dazzling sun, the endless desert extended to the end of the line of sight. Behind the towering barrier, the anti-aircraft artillery position burst out continuously, and blood and monster wreckage fell from the sky, forming a partial rain. Black smoke like giant pillars slowly rose from the huge wreckage or war fortifications, extending into the sky. The wind couldn't blow it away, and the familiar smell of smoke and ashes rushed to his face again. When the ear-piercing alarm sounded again, countless vicious curses and strange arrows whistled from afar. Fleischer put down the piano case, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath in satisfaction. He whistled. Just like that, he bathed in the wind of war. Welcome to the front line of the War of the Worlds. America's 6th defense line, Sonora. Chapter 1189. Above the dried-up desert, the sky was filled with beautiful aurora-like radiance and countless black spots that wriggled like moldy spots. In this border filled with rainbow bridges and hell's bloody path, the wind and sand blew eternally. The broken-down tank flipped over on the ground, and thick smoke rose into the sky along with the signal flare for help. It blended into the smoke that covered the entire desert and was inconspicuous. Outside the temporary fortification built by the flipped armored vehicles, a large group of hiss from hell was incessant. Nightmares shrouded in grayish-black fog wandered among the ferocious beasts. They were not in a hurry to attack, but rather patiently consumed the enemy's strength, ordering the cheap cannon fodder to attack continuously until the enemy was completely out of ammunition. And inside the fortification, the bloodshot eyes stared at the beasts that were spying outside the shooting holes. The red-hot muzzles slowly changed targets, intimidating the restless monsters. In between the roaring gunshots, there were only hoarse curses. The engineer with one less eye spat, and hurriedly used the welding torch to repair the crack on the steel plate. He cursed hoarsely, F*King delivery, F*King emergency mission, F*King emergency support. I send support to the whole world every day, and I don't see anyone coming to help me with my college loan. The other soldiers were silent and hurriedly maintained their weapons, or gasped for breath. The sergeant major, sitting at the front, was covered in a heavy and rough kinetic exoskeleton. He was as tall as a rock, and he did not care about the complaints of his subordinates. He only silently sharpened an old dagger. As he moved, sparks flew out from the gaps in the armor. There were still traces of emergency welding and repair on the steel skeleton. The 7 star-shaped insignia on his right arm that represented his achievements had already dimmed in the fierce battle. Everyone, take the time to rest. The sergeant major raised his indifferent face and ordered, in 3 minutes, if the air support does not arrive, prepare to break out. As soon as the order was given, the soldiers who were originally lying in the corner or on the ground all stood up and struggled like dying wild dogs, shaking their hair, unwilling to let it end like this. The assaulter picked up the overheated machine gun again and asked the engineer, "Screw you, stop nagging. Where's the drum? Play the drum for me." "What drum? I don't have any drum." The engineer retorted angrily. "Why would I give you shit? Do you want it? Where's the big box you carried out?" 2 sets of temporary equipment for first aid kits, 300 rounds of ammunition, and 6 maintenance components. King used them all. What else could I have done? Do you think I'm a blue-skinned cat that can pull out magical gadgets just by rummaging through my pocket? Although he said so, the engineer still put down the welding torch and rummaged through his toolbox. He found 2 copper bars and a pack of explosives. His bloodshot eyes turned even redder. His facial muscles twitched and convulsed. Sticky blood oozed out of his mouth and nose. But in the toolbox, the copper and gunpowder were enveloped by an invisible force. Brand new bullets shot out from the small box one after another like a waterfall. In just a few seconds, a small mountain was piled up. Relying on his mediocre scholar ability, he barely managed to produce a batch of bullets of varying quality. The engineer laughed self-deprecatingly and looked up to say something, but he saw the twisted expression of his comrades. It didn't look like shock and admiration, but more like fear. But it wasn't until the shadow hidden in the air suddenly lunged out and covered his face that a pungent stench hit his face. Boom! The roar of steel burst out. In the eruption of flames, the heavy power armor instantly ejected out. It took less than 0.1 seconds from standstill to assault. The sudden increase in speed would cause an overload of up to 9G. The scarred face of the sergeant major instantly turned crimson red. He charged forward in the defense structure that was too narrow compared to his extreme speed and abruptly stopped in the storm. The red-hot steel arm was already smashing down. In an instant, it suppressed the monster that broke through the air. The iron light flashed in front of the engineer soldier's eyes. Then, sticky and stinky blood spurted out from the split nightmare corpse. Fortunately, the engineer soldier still remembered the general knowledge that was memorized in his head. He quickly backed up and covered his nose and mouth, not being corroded by the poison in the blood. The horrified scream was choked out in his throat and turned into a curse word squeezed out from between his teeth. Fu asterisk K. Without giving them any time to rest, the screams of the nightmares sounded again in the distance, urging the beast horde to launch a fierce attack. Inside the defense structure, everyone was in position in an instant. Even the engineer soldier that just returned from the edge of life and death once again rushed toward the bullets and assisted the assaulter to reload at an unprecedented speed. Roaring gunshots burst out again. Continuous screams, roars, and screams continued to sound outside the defense structure. Looking down from the sky, it was like a lonely reef gradually being drowned by the waves. The combat team that was far away from the defense line was completely blocked by the large group of hell. There was a limit to the final struggle. It was only a matter of time before they died without a complete corpse. The closest allies were 60 kilometers away, and they were madly rushing over. However, there were at least 2 rifts between them, and at this moment it gradually slowed down. They stopped on the spot. This was a meticulously designed trap for the rescuers. This squad was just an unlucky one that was attracted by the fake distress signal. In this desolate border of Solano, where only the flames of war were left, sudden deaths were too common. Even at this moment, the sergeant major's cold expression did not waver at all. It was like a rough and ugly iron block. He just silently held the ridiculously powerful pistol and slowly reloaded, aimed, and fired. Any important threat would be blown into a cloud of sparks. Every time he pulled the trigger, the exoskeleton armor would whine. The reaction force that was enough to make the bones and muscles whine together did not change his movements. Focus on defense. He said, "We still have time." None of the soldiers behind the defense line spoke. There was only bitter silence, because the communications soldier who was protected at the innermost layer was cursing at the depth communicator. He did not care about his manners anymore. He crazily urged, "F***CK, support. Fire support. It's been 10 minutes. Why can't I see a single airplane feather? The storm fusion caused by the Thunder Sea has gone out of control. Flight formation number 1 has lost contact." The communications soldier from the other end reported with pity, "Flight formation number 2 has taken off from Euphrates. ETA, 20 minutes. You bastards, 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, my ashes will be gone, and you still want to support? Can't you be faster? Hurry up." The communications soldier cursed, roared, and was about to cry. He suppressed his sobs, begged, and pleaded. However, there was only sad silence on the other end. In this silent silence, he seemed to have finally understood something and did not speak anymore. "No one will come to save us, sir." The communications soldier turned around and said dully, "We have been abandoned." The sergeant major did not speak. It was as if he did not hear it. He just silently raised his hand, pulled the trigger, reloaded, aimed, and fired again like a machine. It was a futile struggle against hell, until the nightmares in the distance screamed again. The large group of nightmares wandering around could not wait for more food and shouted angrily. The nightmares also lost interest and patience. As the noisy and strange murmurs spread, a huge pustule seemed to bulge in the empty void. It was a tumor, and then it suddenly burst. In the gushing darkness, the huge monster hidden behind the curtains stretched out its strange claws towards the sacrifices here from thousands of miles away. The 9 outstretched fingers and the huge palm cast a shadow that shrouded everything. It grabbed at the ground. The isolated and helpless soldiers shouted and roared in anger. They pulled the trigger at the huge hand that smashed down and spat out the last of their anger. However, The bullets seemed to be swallowed by the endless darkness. Together with the anger, they disappeared. In the incoming hurricane, the engineering soldier screamed, hugged his head, and curled up in the corner. But at that moment, he only saw a dazzling rainbow light that penetrated the sky and the earth. It fell from the sky. Like thunder, it tore apart the heavy darkness. It stopped the oncoming darkness abruptly. The huge claw froze in the air, unable to move, as if it was clamped down by an invisible palm. Right in front of the figure that appeared out of nowhere. When he raised his hand, the 10,000 creations froze. In the dead silence, only the faint sound of the strings echoed in the zither case. It was so clear. "I'm sorry. The landing location seems to have deviated. I think I'm lost." Huaishur turned around and looked at the messy soldiers and asked in confusion. Looking at the identification signal, it should be an ally. "Do you need help?" The engineering soldier looked at him blankly. He nodded instinctively. Then, he saw the young man's right hand slowly tighten and clench. He snapped his fingers. But what burst out was not a crisp sound, but a terrifying loud noise that shook the entire world. It was as if the sound of thunder came out of nowhere and suddenly smashed into the empty space between heaven and earth. In the darkness that rose from the ground, a huge door slowly opened. It pulled the monster's claw deeper into the darkness. Reverse pull. Tragic screams and horrified screams sounded from behind the crack in space. The monster that had been watching for a long time struggled wildly. But the moment it was captured by the gravitational force of the ultimate, all resistance was useless. Even if it endured the pain and tore its arm, the blood that spurted out from the wound turned into a torrent and flew into the darkness. Together with a large group of hell that was scattered around, it was as if an astronomical phenomenon as huge as a black hole had suddenly descended upon this place. It emitted a terrifying gravitational force that could not be avoided. Now, the ultimate was greedily devouring. Through the rapidly shrinking crack, it instantly pulled the huge monster completely into the eternal darkness. It licked, chewed, and tore it into pieces. Soon, the door was sealed again. Everything returned to tranquility. The blood-curdling screams could no longer be heard. Then, under Huaishur's feet, green grass spread out. Proud vitality filled the air, building a new ecological cycle from nothing. It injected life and strength into the dying and injured. It brought back life. While all the soldiers were still looking at each other, the silent sergeant major had already stepped forward, saluted, and reported, "Mr. Huaishur, the Crystal Lattice squad reports to you." The seemingly familiar name made Huaishur pause for a moment, as if he had seen it somewhere before. He could not help but feel puzzled. "We seem to have met before." "Yes." The sergeant major nodded and replied calmly, 2.5 years ago, on the Constellation, I was once under your command." The battle against the decaying dream was still vivid in Huaishur's mind, including the combat squad of the Iron Legion that was assigned to him at that time. Their astonishing quality and efficiency left a clear impression on Huaishur. Looking at it now, although the exoskeleton on the other party's body looked slightly broken, it was no different from the past. However, the Crystal Lattice squad in Huaishur's memory should be an elite combat squad mobilized by the Iron Legion. It was completely different from what he saw in front of him. "Why are you the only one left?" He stopped before he finished speaking. He suddenly realized that he had asked a stupid question. Chapter 1190. How could the Iron Foundry Legion, one of the 4 great legions of the Astronomy Association, be absent from the War of the Worlds? Especially those teams that had participated in the battle against the decaying dream, those carefully cultivated elites. After receiving so many resources and preferential treatment, how could they just stand by and watch when a disaster struck? They were soldiers who had high hopes placed on them, tools that had been carefully created, heroes that had been selected and honed from ordinary people. This was their mission. From the moment they set foot on this path, there was only one result waiting for them. In the long and drawn-out wars, ambushes, assaults, and countless missions, they would gradually wither away until one day, they would be completely wiped out. When Crystal Lattice 1 to 7 stood alone in front of him, Huaishur should have understood. He actually understood. He just subconsciously avoided the answer. Crystal Lattice 1 to 7 was silent and speechless. He just raised his right arm and showed Huaishur his past achievements, everything that Crystal Lattice Team 1 had once created. 7 dim stars, the special class achievements obtained from 7 missions that had protected an entire city and the lives of more than 100,000 people. The gradually peeling paint on the badges seemed to have a piercing light, causing Huaishur to look away. He sighed silently. Under the gloomy sky, a stinky wind blew from afar, mixed with the smell of blood and ashes. Plumes of burning smoke rose from the ground even further away. Even though there was a break in the great battle, the scattered fights and battles still filled every corner. And on the other side of the ground, in the domain that seemed to be shrouded in eternal darkness and dark clouds, there was still shocking lightning flashing, illuminating the outlines of volcanoes and flowing lava on the ground, as well as the outlines of strange settlements. Darkness filled the air. In silence, Huaishur looked around at this devastated world, at this place where countless people were buried. After a long time, "The moldy smell is a bit strong," he whispered. "No matter what, we should open the windows and let in some air, right?" Crystal Lattice 1 to 7 and the soldiers were puzzled. They looked at each other, but they didn't know what he was talking about. Then they saw that the young man raised his hand again. He looked at the hazy sky above his head. In that instant, it was as if thick ink had dripped into the gloomy clouds, spreading out in an instant. Everywhere it passed, everything was dyed pitch black, enveloping everything and spreading in all directions. Amidst the bone-chilling darkness, a massive silhouette slowly emerged from the protection of countless raging thunderbolts. The iron whale moved majestically between heaven and earth. Countless iron wings tore through the dark clouds and flew up in the storm, looking down at all the tiny creatures below. When the vast sound of the organ burst forth, a long echo like the song of a whale filled the sky. The enraged heavenly palace descended upon this place. The heavenly gate opened, towards the domain of hell in the distance. Then an intense light burst forth. The flames surged in the sky like a long river. They flew straight forward without any bend towards the end of the sky. Wherever they passed, all the haze was torn apart and evaporated. Cut! It was as if a nailed window in a dusty house had been opened in an instant. A ray of light from the realm of discovery once again shone on this barren desert, illuminating the eyes of countless people. Then, endless light and heat shone into the deepest part of the darkness. Breaking through the obstruction of the storm and thunderclouds, the heavy harpoon wedged into the earth of hell. As it cracked, endless light spewed out, engulfing everything in the spreading storm. A hemisphere that was so dazzling that it burned through the retina suddenly appeared between the volcanoes and the settlements, burning everything within its range. Then, the swirling fire turned into a rainstorm, sprinkling in all directions, forming a sweet rain from the sky, nourishing all things. The thunderbolts were like giant pillars descending from the heavens. They wandered and spread, turning into giant webs that enveloped the countless settlements. Everything that they touched was disintegrated into dust. There were more frost blades that rose from the ground wherever they passed, piercing through a large group hidden in the sand and rocks, propping them up, helping them to better bathe in the light bestowed by the realm of discovery. Until now, the whistling hurricane blew from afar, rolling up billowing sand and dust, blowing past everyone's faces. Furious roars burst out from the realm of hell. Countless ferocious auras soared into the sky, rising into the sky in this sudden provocation. Even the earth that was injured suddenly propped up its body amidst the loud noise. Just as the lava flowing from the volcanoes and countless storms, the thing that was originally thought to be a mountain slowly adjusted its angle, propping up limbs from the soil. The huge body carried fortresses on its back, and the armor made of black iron seemed to be operating a huge factory. Thick smoke rose from the chimney. The red light of the furnace illuminated the dark clouds, and the towers and steel turrets were like needles covering the whole body. The monster that was hundreds of kilometers long had awakened. Through the gaps in its shell, a pair of eyes that were as empty as a dead fish's stared at the source of the lightning. Malice swept over like a tide. It looked at Huaishur, and Huaishur was also looking at it. On the other side of the world, amidst the sirens, totems representing the American gods appeared on the defensive line formed by countless huge pyramids. The miracles were ready to be engraved. The short stare only lasted for a moment. The resentful aura locked onto Huaishur's position. After completely recording his origin form fluctuations, the giant beast's eyes slowly closed. The realm of hell returned to silence once again. As for Huaishur, she finally averted her gaze. It seems that the greetings are almost done. He patted the dust on his windbreaker, waved his hand, and called down the Nautilus's gangway. Finally, he looked at the crystal unit beside him. "Do you want me to give you a ride?" This time, without waiting for Crystal Unit 1 to 7 to speak, the engineering soldier who knew his boss's character directly grabbed Huaishur's hand, nodded with tears in his eyes, and replied in a trembling voice, "Yes." The rest of the journey back was full of peace, and there were no more unexpected waves. After all, Huaishur had just arrived at the Sonora defense line for less than 5 minutes, and he had already made such big news. Anyone who was not blind had basically seen it. Even if they were blind, they could still feel the waves that shook the entire border. Not to mention, this was an emergency situation where the command center had forcibly modified the Rainbow Bridge's delivery route and used this wave of reality airdrops as an opportunity to send him directly there. There was some movement, but it was really expected. With the deterrence and support of the entire defense line, naturally, there would be no more problems. A few minutes later, they had already landed on the tarmac behind the Great Pyramid. Without waiting for the medical staff who had been waiting by the side to take away the crystal unit on the stretchers, a gray-haired old man rushed up, laughed loudly, and patted Huaishur's shoulder vigorously without any reservations. "You did well, Huaishur, you did well." However, it seemed that he was too happy and accidentally used a little too much strength, slapping half of Huaishur into the concrete. Suddenly, the scene became a little awkward. Huaishur and the old man looked at each other. After a long time, the old man coughed twice, reached out, and pulled Huaishur out and helped him pat the dust on his legs. "Oh, it's rare to be happy, so I got a little too excited." It's okay." Huaishur forced a smile, feeling that the shoulder blade that had just been squeezed seemed to be a little broken. Fortunately, for Yin Zhongjuan, this injury was not even comparable to a scratch, and it was healed in the blink of an eye. Fortunately, he reacted quickly, otherwise he would have been slapped into the ground by this old man. He did not even need a burial mound. It could only be said that the local gang was too enthusiastic. He did not think that this old man was trying to intimidate him. After all, the other party was famous for being simple-minded and straightforward in the American genealogy. If he was not happy with him, he would have directly slapped him in the face. The kind that would shatter his head and soul. Now, in front of him was the leader of the 6th line of defense in America, Sonora, and also a Tier 5 general who had been famous in the American genealogy for many years. The contemporary bear god, Richard Lawrence. "I was so happy to know that you were coming. Come, let's go first. Have you eaten? Let's go and have a drink first." Lawrence waved his hand and walked in front, leading Huaishur directly to the canteen. His long hair that was combed to the back of his head was white, and his beard danced in the hot wind. His burly figure cast a huge shadow. Following behind him, Huaishur had a strange illusion that he was running after a mountain. Richard seemed to be in a good mood. He walked in front with his hands behind his back, his 2 hairy legs swinging in his flowery pants, and he was even humming a little tune. To be honest, Huaishur originally thought that the old man would hold him accountable. After all, if he had not handled the cannon shot well, the large group of people in the infernal realm might have started another tide of war in the restlessness. However, the old man did not seem to care at all. Instead, he held the menu and kept recommending the special agave in the local military restaurant. It had to be said that the flavor was one thing, but the alcohol content was really strong. Drinking it was like chewing on a knife. Relax. Why sure, relax. After finishing his steak, Richard wiped his mouth and waved enthusiastically. Just treat it as your own home, your own home. Why sure's face twitched. He turned around and looked at the countless uniformed soldiers running outside and the bustling sports field. It was really hard to feel the warmth of home. Moreover, he did not come here to go home. Anyway, don't think about that nonsense. There's no need to be nervous. Work is work. Izzy's friend is my friend. That old man has a high opinion of you. When it's time to use you, he will definitely not let you sit on the bench. The bear god picked up his glass and drank it in one gulp. As for the rest, I don't care. It's really reassuring to hear that. Huaisher sighed, picked up his glass, and took a sip of the bear god's custom-made special agave. The taste was really a little too strong. At the same time, he also felt a lot of wary gazes. There were also people who did not hide their resistance. After all, as an outsider, Huaisher was really too conspicuous. Even he himself felt that he was a little annoying. Chapter 1191. How should he summarize his current identity? Even Huaisher himself was a little confused by this question. In order to deal with the situation of the War of Worlds and to make more contributions to the current situation, not long ago, Russell generously waved his hand and turned Huaisher from Celestial Genealogy's tool to the world's tool. This time, it was a private car for public use. However, this was not unexpected or out of place. After all, in addition to being the successor of Celestial Genealogy and the backbone of the current generation, Huaisher's official identity was also a special military officer of the Command Bureau. If the Command Bureau wanted to deploy him, it was just a matter of a piece of paper. It was just that previously, to give face to Russell and Celestial Genealogy, they did not invade their territory. Now that Russell, that old bastard, had taken out his tool for everyone to use in order to gain more exposure, the Command Bureau naturally would not refuse. Moreover, this was also due to Huaisher's own needs. Squatting the ivory tower was definitely safe. Not to mention safety, as long as the border defense line did not collapse, the ivory tower protected by the core layer was the safest place in the world. However, although it was safe, he was basically useless. When the War of Worlds was over, there might be some fun people who would make some world-famous paintings. Also, he felt bad in his heart. Although he said that he did not want to work every day, if he really hid in the shelter and did nothing, he would feel uncomfortable all over. Besides, if he squatted at home all the time, he would not have enough advancement materials. According to Tangi's words, how could he sleep? With so many rulers still wandering outside, how could he sleep at an age when he was about to advance? Therefore, after lying in bed for 2 months to recover from his injuries, he was directly thrown out to be a firefighter all over the world. Anyway, it would take some time for the Continuation Academy to prepare the remuneration, so he might as well take advantage of this time to accumulate materials. For example, the remains of rulers, the remains of rulers, and the remains of rulers. This time, he specially applied to come to Sonora because he heard that there seemed to be rulers appearing in this area recently. I'll find a chance to King, do something big. Unfortunately, even though Huaisher was trying to save the dying, heal the wounded, and defend the present, in the eyes of others, it was more or less a little annoying. Putting aside the general xenophobic atmosphere in the legions and the local areas, war itself was too tragic a job to be treated as seriously as possible. Before getting to know him, it was natural that some people would treat him as an idiot who came here to earn military merits and gild himself. However, after getting to know him better, some people were worried that he had other motives. At this time, using the name of the Astronomy Association to parachute in as support, it was one thing for him to be a Tier 4, but his identity was also sensitive. Are you here as reinforcements or to supervise the troops? Did he think that the casualties of his brothers were not severe enough? Or did he think that the results of the battle were not enough and wanted to expand his advantage? Many people felt that this wave of celestial genealogy had reached too far and meddled too much. Huaishi's intentions were unclear, and they needed to be cautious. To put it simply, he was not one of them. They had to be careful. If Huaishi had a clear conscience, it would be fine, but the problem was his current position was more or less like an army supervisor. After all, his position was here, and the internal benefits of the Astronomy Association were not low. The mission briefing he submitted every week directly bypassed America and could reach directly to the decision-making room of the Command Bureau, especially since he did not know where that dog was spreading rumors outside, saying that he liked to write in a diary and would write more than 100,000 words a month. He liked to write his true thoughts in his diary, and what he wrote in his diary was the truth. Under such circumstances, to be able to obtain the approval and trust of the bear god really made Huaishi feel relieved. I already said relax. Richard grinned, revealing a row of uneven yellow teeth. Generally speaking, everyone is still very much looking forward to having a worker like you, cough cough, a strong support like you. I also hope that you can continue to perform well. A little bit of gossip is nothing. After all, there is no profession that recognizes real merits and results more than a soldier. I have full confidence in you on this point. No, you have too much confidence in me, don't you think? Huaishi blushed with shame. He always had the feeling that he would be tied to the bow of the ship and charged by this old thing, or sent to the vanguard of the decisive battle. That pair of small eyes were full of anticipation and joy of getting a new toy, as if to say, it's a pity that such a good tool is not used. After that, the old man did not speak anymore. He patiently waited for Huaishi to finish his portion. Then, he roughly pushed the plates of the two people to the side, put his elbows on the table, and leaned forward slightly. He looked at the support that was still warm in front of him. So, we've eaten and drunk, Richard said. Let's talk about work. Huaishi shrugged. To be honest, if we can talk about work at the beginning, my appetite will be better. Then, what do you think of the Sonora defense line? The bear god asked directly. It's impregnable and heavily guarded. It's really a rare example in the War of the Worlds. Huaishi answered without hesitation. After all, he did not have to pay to say something nice. Besides, could he really rely on the background of the Astronomy Society to inflate himself to the point of giving orders to America's defense? Okay, you're full of flattery. You're Russell's student, no doubt. Richard curled his lips and interrupted his following praise. Seeing that you're a smart one, I won't beat around the bush. City defense, commando, command, logistics, coordination, air and space support, environmental control and supply, a total of more than 40 departments. Which one do you want to go to? I'll follow your arrangements. Huaishi answered immediately. Since I'm here to be a tool, I'll go wherever is convenient and suitable. The bear god smacked his lips, thought for a moment, and nodded. Then go to the frontline city defense. The Tower of Glory has been lacking a guardian recently. Young man, it's never wrong to train a little. Okay, Huaishi nodded. As for Huaishi's position, it was decided in a few words. Out of respect and importance to the Astronomy Society, the bear god first asked for his opinion on the defense line. However, he was really asking for the Astronomy Society's opinion. Without the permission of the Astronomy Society, how could Huaishi have the guts to talk nonsense? And out of admiration for Huaishi and recognition of his ability, the bear god directly asked for his needs. Huaishi was still in a proper position, and his posture was humble. It was obvious that the old man was very satisfied with this. Troublemakers and trash were not scary. What was scary was not knowing the situation and not knowing what was going on. They were so arrogant that they thought they could solve all the problems and began to give orders. Who are you, gay tyrant? When Huaishi put on the appearance of a newcomer who was willing to contribute more and integrate into the group, it was naturally good for everyone. Everyone was happy. Guarding the city defense was the answer given by the old man. To put it simply, it could be compared to Dongxia's southern Heavenly Gate guard Juling Shun, guarding the defense line's vital points and resisting attacks from hell. First of all, this position was neither big nor small. It was not big enough to affect the strategy, but it was more or less a high-level backbone. And as an important position to guard the defense line, it was not a disgrace to Huaishir's identity. Secondly, although this position was a little tiring, and he had to be on duty every day and could not act arbitrarily, he could produce results and make a difference. Even if there was no war, he would naturally accumulate hard work. Although this was the front line of the battlefield when hell attacked, it was still the defense line under his, but after all, there were many miraculous engravings and experts supporting him, especially when Yun Zhongjuan and Great Si Ming were very good at the environment. Being able to occupy the home ground had infinite advantages. It was not that there was no risk, but for Huaishir, the risk was not particularly high. With his ability to survive, he would probably be able to stand firm even if his allies were all dead. And it was not that there were no opponents who could kill him in a second, but to be able to meet a ruler of that level who lurked in the dark as an assassin, not to mention Huaishir, even Russell could only accept it. Consider yourself unlucky. The Bear God's arrangement was not without the intention of testing Huaishir's strength. Little brother, if you work hard and have results, everything will be fine. It doesn't matter if you are an idiot. I will give face to the Astronomical Association and Russell. I will take the free resume and achievements and leave as soon as I have enough days. Good, straightforward enough. Seeing that Huaishir agreed so quickly, the Bear God became happier. After loosening his belt, he patted his bulging belly and said, "If you have any requests, as long as they are not excessive, just say them. As long as I can satisfy you within my authority, I will not fool you. Of course, if you are still full of tricks, just pretend I didn't say anything." For young people who were to his liking, he never minded making things easy for them. But if Huaishir was still pretending to be serious, he had no interest in acting. Sensing the meaning in the other party's words, Huaishir fell into deep thought. After thinking for a while, he said, "There's indeed one." "Oh, interesting." Richard raised the corner of his eye and said, "Tell me, let me see how big your appetite is." According to the rules, in addition to the adjutant assigned by the higher-ups, the city defense should also have a small team of less than 60 people to dispatch. That's right. Richard grinned and said, "You want more people?" "No, I will listen to the arrangements of the defense line, but I want to recruit a few people." Huaishir said solemnly, "The Crystal Team." Richard's smile froze for a moment. After going through the relevant information in his mind, he nodded calmly. "Okay." The Bear God nodded and said, "Whether it is to promote former subordinates or to support trusted people, people who remember old friendships are always easier to get along with. Is there anything else? Other than that, let's see what happens in the future." Huaishir replied. So Richard picked up the napkin, wiped his mouth, and threw it on the table. He waved at the adjutant not far away, and naturally, someone brought over the letter of appointment that had just been written. Then, "Prepare to take office, Sir Defender." The commander of Sonora finally patted him on the shoulder and told him meaningfully, "Let me see your ability that has gained His Majesty's favor." Huaishir's expression twitched. He took the letter of appointment and watched the Bear God leave. Why did it feel like a random blessing from the White Crown King was more useful than the transfer order from the Astronomy Association? After a long time, he sighed and turned to look at the adjutant who welcomed him to the defense line. He asked in confusion, "Speaking of which, Sonora's situation is so bad, everyone shouldn't care about the weather, right?" The confused adjutant nodded subconsciously. Then, from that day onwards, he never saw a sunny day again. Chapter 1192. In the gloomy sky, the deafening sound of thunder reverberated. From left to right, from right to left, from front to back, and from back to front. Damn it, it's even a stereo. After staying in the shroud of the strange loud sound for a long time, a strange illusion would appear in a trance. When one closed their eyes, they would feel as if there was a huge, invisible iron ball rolling continuously behind the dark clouds, sometimes to the east, sometimes to the west. When the fragile shell of the clouds was crushed, the terrifying mass would fall to the mortal world. The torrential rain poured down endlessly from the dark clouds, shrouding the dry desert, turning the dry sand into a muddy swamp, and then freezing the muddy swamp into a frosty ice field. And just outside the dark clouds, a step away, was the scorching heat and the scorching sun that made people want to peel off their skin. If one peered in from the outside, they would feel that the torrential rain and the hair-raising chill were like illusions. Only when one actually walked in, one would feel the loneliness and fear as if the whole world had completely abandoned them. The place where the rain shrouded seemed to have become another world. The wind's speed, the temperature, the terrain, and even the depth had been distorted by an invisible will, forming a dark domain that was like a different world. The heavy rain curtain and the fog that lingered in it seemed to be alive. Even if the wind blew, it still did not move at all. And in the dark world that was distorted by the rain and fog, after looking for a long time, it seemed that one could faintly glimpse a vague and incomplete shadow. Like the dead trapped in it, they wandered in vain, and their desperate screams were annihilated in the sound of the rain. The cold rain spread along with the dark clouds, swallowing all sound and vitality wherever it passed, disappearing without a trace, leaving only a pool of mud that quickly evaporated under the scorching sun. Even a large group of people that fell into it disappeared. Only the mournful screams and the intermittent thunder could be heard occasionally, but soon it disappeared in the dead silence. In the beginning, the clear rain was as transparent as crystal. But after half a month, all the rain and fog were dyed with a layer of scarlet that could not be washed away. Now, it was gradually turning dark. Right now, on the barren land of Sonora, the strange demonic realm formed by the dark clouds was roaming freely. It chased after the aura of hell, greedily devouring all life forms that were drawn into it. It was as if an invisible monster was hunting. However, when a furious light rose from the hell domain, the dancing dark clouds would quickly dissipate and leave. Or they would turn into a snowstorm or a turbulent flow, seeping into the soil and disappearing without a trace. Finally, it rose again in another direction. It was as if they were being pulled by an invisible string. Following the movement of the hand, the huge dark clouds and storm domain turned into a kite of calamity, soaring in the sky and casting an ominous shadow on hell. Yet, he didn't seem to go any deeper. No matter how much the monsters in the dark gritted their teeth and waited, the dark cloud only lingered at the edge, rubbing, jumping, testing, and challenging the limits of the settlement's patience. Hey, I came in. Hey, I went out. I came in again. Are you going to hit me? Hey, you can't hit me. F***CK. Are you done yet? In the burning mountains, the ruler, the Grand Duke of the demonic mountain, whose blood pressure was at its peak, had wanted to mobilize the army more than once to crush that bastard who sat on the city wall and whistled every day. If it weren't for his subordinates and loyal hounds stopping him, perhaps hundreds of large groups would have been mobilized. Big brother, don't go. They have more people. Calm down. Calm down. In the end, the Grand Duke's fury could only turn into cannons fired from the mountains. Burning rocks that were not inferior to real meteorites flew out from the crater of the volcano and smashed down on the Sonora defense line. Soon, they were destroyed in midair by precise bursts of fire. Apart from temporarily dispelling the storm, it only caused a few more pitch-black burn marks and 2 large craters to appear on the barren land. On the other side, on the defense line of reality, a bright light rose from the Great Pyramid once again. The impassioned sound of the bell echoed throughout the entire defense line. The activated divine mark activated on its own, projecting a mirage-like kingdom in the sky of the desert. A brilliant light descended and turned into a pale blue feather, falling toward the Tower of Glory. Divine grace, the silent and cold divine power was awakened. The rain god's joy descended so straightforwardly, not hiding his admiration. In the past, just such a sign was enough to make countless priests and nobles cheer and excited. But now, everyone was only left with numbness. It could only be said that no matter what the situation was, once it happened too many times, it would be difficult to maintain a noble and cold image or a mysterious veil. Damn, it's here again. Bear God Richard, who was in the center of the Great Pyramid, changed his posture from his chair. He scratched his butt and complained impatiently. How old are you? Do you have to be so excited just by sprinkling 2 drops? I go to the toilet so many times every day, but I don't see you happy. Boom. After a bolt of divine punishment struck, a burn mark appeared on the old man's white hair. The other adjutants and staff officers in the room could only lower their heads and pretend that they were busy. Sorry, they didn't see anything. Anyway, it wasn't the first time their boss had said such rebellious words. Even Mammakilia didn't care. So why should they care? Besides, everyone had the heart of a lemon. It was like after working hard for a lifetime and finally becoming a senior executive, they found that there was a guy on the board of directors who sent offers to the people of the neighboring company every day. His own inherited God's power was actually chasing after another family's male cowherd and calling out to him. What was going on? Could you be a little more sensible? Could it be that their own children weren't good enough? Why couldn't they chase after that foreign star? Unfortunately, the rain god, who had only left behind his divine instincts and source code, couldn't care less about this. Since the first day Yun Zhongjuan took office, the excited divine Mark had spontaneously begun to bless him. If it weren't for the insufficient authority verification, he would have been directly connected to the innermost source circuit of the Sonora defense line. All the supplies were opened. Just pour, just pour. He didn't even want a blood sacrifice. It was like a rocket thrown by a nameless tycoon in a live broadcast room late at night. He didn't want you to sing or dance. He just wanted you to do what you were supposed to do. Rain, thunder, and then strike those bastards to death. Strike them and be done with it. In this regard, Huaishir was also very helpless. He had been dead for so many years. Why was his temper still so bad? But if the old man's spirit in heaven wanted to hear something, he would be embarrassed to pretend that he didn't see anything. Anyway, there was nothing to do. He would just treat it as grinding his skill proficiency. In this way, relying on the massive source supply of the American family, he began to let his little dark cloud free on this grassy battlefield between wars. In addition to creating a no-man's land in Solano, he also received unanimous praise from the crows. There were so many crystals of disaster that they couldn't finish eating, and even the furnace with abundant soul fragments couldn't burn them all. How was this hell? This was simply heaven. Everyone seemed to be very satisfied. Only Huaishir was so bored that he was about to scratch his feet. Every day when he opened his eyes, he was looking forward to it. Why hadn't the war started yet? I've been here for half a month. No matter how much I reorganize, I should be done with the preparations, right? Or did the other side make up their minds to hide and not make a move? Impossible. Every time I went to visit them, I felt that they were still quite angry. It couldn't be that they couldn't do it at such a young age, right? Could it be that the world has changed? Even the sea of lightning has started to become a nuisance? Thinking of this, Huaishir let out a long sigh and collapsed on the tattered recliner. He didn't want to move anymore. In any case, he had been here for half a month. Other than writing the weather forecast for the defense line every day, he had only been sitting on chair. Occasionally, there would be monsters bold enough to come over, but Huaishir didn't even see their shadows before they were killed by the other towers. Not to mention their heads. Not even a hair was left for Huaishir. There was no other way. Everyone was bored to death. During the war, in order to avoid information leakage, there wasn't even a Wi-Fi that could connect to the external network. The entertainment function was also mediocre. Even the small books that the crows secretly took to the black market to sell had become a hot commodity with crazy prices. In any case, Huaishir could still rely on the Astronomy Association's network to connect to the section of tomorrow's news to understand the situation of the outside world. As a result, as soon as he clicked on it, he saw the epic victory of the Endless Sea. After being punished by the crown, the great sage equal to heaven, who killed the ruler, after passively fighting for a long time, the Eastern Xia genealogy and the Russian Federation simultaneously launched a counterattack from both sides of the Iron Rain Wilderness and the Endless Sea. They defeated the Angel Legion of Grace and pushed the projection of the Blessed Land down 10 depths. In the photo on the front page, Kwafu's big face was so beautiful that snot bubbles were coming out of his nose. Next to him, Xin Niao, who had been robbed of the spotlight, was calm. He just smiled and smoked his pipe, while Han Dun, who was hiding in an inconspicuous corner, was like a passerby. Then it was the triumphant progress of the Roman genealogy. In front of the tens of thousands of troops of both sides, the Roman Emperor Titus took the initiative to challenge, and the withered king gladly accepted the challenge. The two rulers, who could be called above tens of thousands of people in the present world and hell, directly rolled up their sleeves and started fighting. In 3 days, they sank 2 hells, each with victory and defeat. After that, they placed a heavy bet and sent out their subordinates to fight one-on-one. Just like the Colosseum of ancient Rome, the glorious duel lasted for 10 days and won the ownership of 4 depths and a total of 26 hells for Rome. The Russian Federation turned the entire Iron Rain wilderness into a meat grinder. The battle between the huge moving steel city and the molten hell that fell from the sky had yet to end. When the battle was at its most stalemate, the 2 full night regiments were emptied within a day. If it weren't for the desperate efforts of the Astronomy Association's supervisors, in order to keep the heads of the 2 rulers, the Russian Federation would have to sacrifice 2 more night regiments to attack from both sides. Those lunatics really didn't care about their lives when they fought. They didn't care about their lives, but they didn't want their enemies to take their lives. On the other hand, it was the miserable state of India. When the Thunderlord's interest was piqued and he personally took action, his natural enemy, Green Neck, was seriously injured, and the defeat of Somnian City was repeated. Fortunately, the situation was stabilized with Tyr's support. Yesterday, it was confirmed that the Hellfire blockade had to be activated to maintain the genealogy. Together with their own borders in hell, it formed an impenetrable iron wall defense in a short period of time. But after that, they would probably have to rely on the support of other genealogies. The first and second lines of defense of America were still in a state of crossfire with the Many Abyss coalition forces, but with the Feathered Serpent personally overseeing, they were still stable and couldn't cause too much trouble. As for Egypt, Egypt was still the same Egypt. There was no movement, no sound of wind, and it was so quiet as if nothing had happened. It was still isolated, but in the observation of all the mirrors, the boundless flames that represented the pharaoh were still as glorious as before, not wavering in the slightest because of the invasion of the abyss. In the past few months since the start of the War of the Worlds, the entire present world was like an iron pot on fire, gradually boiling in the perpetual movement of the abyss tide. An even more intense battle was probably already on the way. It was just that no one could figure out when and where the contradictions would completely erupt amidst the numerous and complicated deep undercurrents. Sir, are you up there?" At dusk, when Huaishur was about to fall asleep, he heard a shout from below the tower. His adjutant, a bronze-skinned girl, poked her head out from below the steps and waved at him. "The old man called you for a meeting. He said that the movie is about to start. You're finally here." Yun Zhongjuan, who was about to go crazy from boredom, had a glint in his eyes as he excitedly rubbed his small hands. "Let's go." Chapter 1193. In the silent meeting room, only the sound of heavy breathing could be heard. Under the light that descended from the sky, the projection from the scope gradually appeared. After the sun that represented the current realm and the sun that represented the borders appeared, what surged and filled the air was an endless haze. Up, down, left, and right everywhere, rising from the bottom of the dark abyss. And in that misty haze, a little bit of thick ink slowly appeared, covering the light of Donxia, Rome, the Russian Federation, America, and India, Pulai, Jotunheim, Tashi, the place where the mountains collided, and even Sonora, where they were. Countless borders formed rings, and countless rings formed the main body of the current border defense line. Relying on the 3 major blockades, the power of the current realm radiated into the deep zone. After obtaining unprecedented strategic depth, they also had to face unprecedented pressure at the same time. And now, in the dancing haze, black dots slowly appeared, forming a stripe-like existence that was slowly approaching the current realm. And what was even more terrifying was the darkness that rose from the deepest part of hell. It was like a gushing spring. Thousands of strands of darkness gathered, overlapped, and separated. Like a living thing, it gradually extended toward the current realm, enveloping everything from all directions. It was like the convergence of the ocean currents in the deep sea. But what it brought was not a rich fishing season, but the flames of war. Under the observation of the scope, every black dot was the projection of a disaster formed by an entire army, and every stripe was the military strength of a ruler. Every branch was the destructive power formed by the convergence of endless disasters in hell. Just looking at it made one's scalp tingle. When the projection of the scope shrunk to Solano, the Bronze Eyes observation report appeared. Explorers who had ventured deep into countless hells had provided first-hand data, and through the Directorate of Command's compilation and calculation, they had made future predictions. There was a more than 60% probability that there would be two main forces of the undercurrent attacking the major defense lines of America. The longest would be half a month, and the shortest would be a week. And Solano's defense line, which was relatively on the side, would bear the main pressure at that time. It was even estimated that at least 3 rulers would come to the battlefield. This was really great, cough, cough. It was too difficult. Huaishur, who was sitting at the end of the long table, almost beamed with joy. Fortunately, he had learned a little bit of acting skills from the old bastard, so he was able to keep up with the solemn atmosphere in the room and not be beaten to death on the spot. But didn't he come here just to wait for this? Just as he was secretly rubbing his hands and preparing for a big fight, the projection went out. Light reappeared, illuminating the solemn faces. At the front of the conference table, the projection of the feathered serpent knocked on the ashtray and looked around. Is the situation clear? This is going to be a tough battle. Richard scratched the age spots on his neck and smacked his lips. If it's a tough battle, then so be it. It's an eye-opener to have such a big battle in my life. In any case, it was time to fight. As for the old men in Congress, they wouldn't let us be orphans, right? Huaishur opened his eyes when he heard that the Master of Pedigree had sent reinforcements and was still able to play along. Was workplace communication always so straightforward? I've learned it. I'll try it when I get back to the ivory tower. We'll have everything we need, but don't even think about the ridiculous things in your report. The feathered serpent glanced at him. How could she not know what this old thing was holding back? Don't forget that the 2nd and 4th lines of defense are also the main war zones. You don't even have a river here. It's fine if you want air support, but what's the point of having a navy? Who said there's no river? Richard retorted in a loud voice. You haven't seen it recently. The rain god appears every now and then, and we have Yun Zhongju in here. Not only does he do a good job, but he's also famous for having a lot of water. Every morning, the water starts to flow. The feathered serpent rolled her eyes and pretended not to hear anything. If she really fell into this old thing's trap, this thing could talk to her all day long. Richard, this old thing, was good at fighting, but when it came to budgeting, he was really ruthless. It was no longer a small knife blocking the way, but a big axe forcefully robbing the way. He went to the Capitol Hill once a year for 3 days each time. When he left, the budget department would cry a river of tears. If they really believed him, he could even move the 3rd son to Solano. In order to make him shut up quickly, the feathered serpent could only knock on the table again. She glanced around, and her gaze suddenly fell on Huaishur. Huaishur felt a chill run down his spine. Could it be that she saw through his secret happiness? I've seen the monthly report from the Directorate of Defense. You've been here for half a month, right? The feathered serpent asked. What do you think? For a moment, everyone's surprised gaze fell on Huaishur's face. This made him, a non-staff member who came to listen in on the process, feel a lot of pressure. Why aren't you two following the routine? It was not that he was being modest, but how could the defense of the American genealogy be judged by a celestial genealogy coward like him? He moved back a little, coughed twice, and decided to be modest. There are seniors and elders here. I don't have the right to speak. Let's not talk. No. It's because of this that I want to hear your opinion. The feathered serpent smiled patiently, full of encouragement and expectation. Combat power and experience aside, relatively speaking, you have more experience in being unlucky. Huaishi's old blood was stuck in his throat. He wanted to say something, but stopped. Damn it. So you're looking for an unlucky person like me to learn from. However, when the feathered serpent said this, the expressions of the others changed from shock and indignation to admiration, respect, and recognition in an instant. Their gazes towards Huaishi also became expectant. Who is this? This is the famous old unlucky person from both sides of the present hell. He's the sort of disaster that blows up cars, collapses wherever he goes, and kills whoever he meets. You see, he's only been here for half a month, and we've changed from a side battlefield to a main battlefield. It's right to learn from him. Master Huai, do you think we should take the middle road this time? Huaisha only felt his vision go black. How the hell would I know? If he had known, he wouldn't have asked Tongi for directions before he left. So none of her travel plans were safe, right? He felt that at least half of his bad luck, no, more than half of it, was this black-hearted woman's credit. But now, he couldn't explain it. Moreover, many of the higher-ups of the American lineage, including the feathered serpent, were still looking forward to it. At this time, if he didn't say a few words, he would be a little shameless. Thinking of this, he could only cough twice, trying hard to maintain a serious and solemn look. He took a deep breath, and in an instant, his originally nervous expression disappeared, and a mysterious smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. In a split second, he changed from a hothead with no confidence to a solemn and dignified look. Regarding this, I have a few opinions that I want to share and discuss with everyone. He held the teacup, and after getting into the mood, he said slowly, "At present, the situation is not very optimistic. For Solano Defense Line, this is a very serious test. If we don't do something in time, we will face a lot of pressure in the future. I believe that as long as we cooperate sincerely under the leadership of Mr. Feathered Serpent, we will definitely be able to. However, we can't underestimate the enemy's strength too much. After all, there is still the threat of the ruler. Therefore, we have to be cautious. At the same time, we can't be too rigid and be scared out of our wits by the enemy. So we still have to. Finally, there's more." He spoke for half an hour in one breath. After Huaisha lowered his head and drank the last bit of tea root, he put down the teacup and let out a long breath. He hadn't spoken so much in a long time. It was comfortable. In this short interval, the feathered serpent, the adjutant, the staff, and even the other stage 5 participants fell into silence. Everyone looked at each other. He seemed to have said a lot, but it seemed like he didn't say anything. He seemed to have said a lot of useful ideas, but it seemed like none of them were useful. He seemed to have helped everyone to analyze, but the analysis seemed to be the same. Nothing happened. Only time passed silently. In this silence, Richard scratched his butt, picked up the spittoon, and spat. He asked with a squint, "What did you say after talking for so long?" "Just a little opinion," Huaisha replied with a smile. "TSK." A mocking sneer sounded from the other side of the long table, and a few contemptuous gazes looked over. That's it. The likes and dislikes of ascendants had always been straightforward, let alone in the army, where the smell of gunpowder was the thickest. The voices and rejection of Huaisha had not stopped until now. However, Huaisha seemed to be unaware. He calmly picked up the teacup that had been refilled. His expression was as calm as a clay statue. His expression was tranquil. In any case, he wasn't here to criticize or applaud. He didn't care at all. The feathered serpent just casually nodded. He didn't expect him to have any amazing opinions. His original intention was to turn the meeting back to normal, but he didn't expect this guy to be able to talk so much nonsense. For a moment, he had a new understanding of Russell's ability to teach students. Mother asterisk her, this vivid tortoise, he's definitely his biological son. At this point, the meeting could finally continue. Unfortunately, Richard clearly didn't intend to let him go. "Come on, kid." The old man pinched the steel-like stubble on his chin and glanced at him. "This is our military council, not a place for you to dawdle. Stop joking around," he said. "At least take out something." At the end of the long table, Huaisher couldn't help but sigh. Why bother? He said, I'm just an external aide, and a fourth rank at that. Why do I have to blabber on and steal the show? Can't I just listen to orders? You're the guardian of the Tower of Glory, Huaisher. You're the guardian that I personally selected. Richard raised his eyebrows. I don't care what others think, but at the very least, you have to satisfy me. Tell me, what do you really think? The teasing smile that often hung on his face disappeared, and the old man with white hair and beard emitted a trembling aura of majesty. His golden eyes were like stars, and his breath was colder than the cold wind from his mouth and nose. He was clearly just sitting in his seat, but his body seemed to fill the entire conference room. It made people feel that as long as he moved slightly, everything in front of him would shatter and collapse under the infinite power. Now, the guardian of the earth and souls asked solemnly, waiting for his answer. Huaisher sighed helplessly. All right, since you've said so. He put down his teacup and shrugged. Since I'm the youngest here, I'll be the one to say the unpleasant words first. How to fight, when to fight, how to fight. These are definitely not for me to say. But those have nothing to do with me. There's only one thing I can be sure of. From today onwards, the Tower of Glory will enter the first sequence. I will go to the forefront of the defense line. The frozen silence came out of nowhere, and only a low voice echoed in the air. I didn't come here to use flowery words to convey anything. In contrast, I prefer to be simple and straightforward and use actions to express myself. So, no matter what happens when the time comes, I will be at the forefront until Sonoran no longer needs me. That's why I came. Huaisher looked around at the doubtful faces. She smiled and told them, yes. As for the rest, do as you please. Chapter 1194. After leaving the meeting room, Huaisher was very calm on the way back. Only the adjutant, who was waiting at the gate, came up to him with his eyes wide open. It was as if he had received the news from somewhere. He was full of surprise. Sir, are you serious? What else? Are you kidding? Huaisher asked in confusion. I'm not here for a vacation or a tour. If I really want to drink tea and read the newspaper every day, why don't I just stay in school? Wow, the adjutant exclaimed in surprise. You're so brave. It was as if he had just met him for the first time. What made people respect him was not only his bravery and fierceness, which directly pushed the Tower of Glory to the forefront, but also his undisguised arrogance in front of the feathered serpent. Please don't misunderstand. We, the celestial genealogy, came here to find a place to fight hell. It just so happened that this was the territory of the American genealogy. That matter-of-fact look on his face was truly infuriating. Just now in the meeting room, when he said, everyone do whatever you want. It was simply a direct mockery. The crowd was agitated. There were more than one or two people who were so angry that they slammed the table. Being humiliated by an external aide in front of them, anyone with a little bit of courage could not stand it. It was not that he wanted to make Huaisher suffer in front of the feathered serpent and Richard. Anyone who would think of internal strife at such a time was either crazy or a traitor. Instead, he wanted to issue a challenge that was even more intense. You're the only one in Solano who came to fight hell? Aren't you the front line? Who's afraid of you? Come on, let's fight together. Whoever moves first is a coward. It can only be said that the atmosphere was very lively. Richard was very annoyed. At first, he just did not like Huaisher's polite words from Russell. He wanted to force the kid to show some real skills and not just stand still. At least, he wanted to show others what he was capable of. In the end, he did not expect this kid to act like a good guy without a temper. He turned around and used a lot of power, causing the situation to become unmanageable. It was a good thing to have high morale and fighting spirit, but it was ridiculous to write requests on the spot, from city defense to Marines to air support. If they really accepted all the requests, almost all of Solano's defensive forces would be outside the city walls. How would they be able to fight a defensive battle? He might as well change his home and learn from the lunatics of the Russian Federation. Moreover, others might not know, but how could he not know? Huaishur dared to push the Tower of Glory to the front lines because he had a tough life. He was tough, and he was also tough. If things went wrong, he might be able to continue fighting until the last line of defense collapsed. As for the other brittle skins, they would have to wait a bit. There were even Tier 3 players who dared to approach him. Don't you guys have any self-awareness? However, even though he acted as if he was unhappy and brainless, this military intelligence meeting, which was originally meant to be used as a means of communication, was unexpectedly successful. Originally, he was worried that the defense would be too heavy, which would lower the morale of the Solano defense line. Now, he didn't even have to fight the chicken blood. The meeting was not over yet, and one or two of them were already sharpening their swords, waiting for the arrival of the Dark Abyss to prove who was the real man of Solano. The morale of the soldiers was commendable. Even the budget and support that the Feathered Serpent had been keeping a tight lid on had been greatly reduced. After the meeting ended, Richard patted Huaishur's shoulder and laughed. On the way back, in the back seat, Huaishur noticed that his adjutant was looking at him curiously and doubtfully. "What's wrong?" Huaishur didn't even raise her eyes as she asked, "Are you afraid?" "Indeed, it's not reasonable for you to go to the front lines at your age. It's not too late for you to write a report and change your position. Otherwise, it will be too late after my request is approved." No. I'm just curious. Sir, your skin is so good. How you take care of it?" The girl who was driving raised her arm and looked at her bronze skin. "I don't see you wearing any sunscreen. How can you still be so white?" "I've gotten 2 degrees darker in the past 2 days." In the silence, Huaishur sighed helplessly. "So, you're not worried about yourself at all?" "Worried? Worried about what?" the girl asked in confusion. "Going to the front lines? That's fine. Besides, Liz told me that although you're not a human most of the time, if something happens, it's definitely the safest to follow you. For someone like me, who doesn't know how to use my brain, I just need to follow you closely. Even if I want to run, I'll wait until you're dead." "That's reasonable." Huaishur was speechless. The girl also smiled as if she had been praised. "Like I said, sir, it's definitely safe to be by your side." "No, I don't know if it's safe to be by my side, but you really don't have a brain." Huaishur wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he waved his hand helplessly. "Let her be. Sandra Young, 19 years old, female, American pedigree ascendant, now Huaishur's adjutant." Of course, the real name was longer than this. Unlike other places, the names of the inheritors of noble blood in America often started from a few hundred words. For important members of a huge family like Liz and her Uncle Izzy, the names would only be more complicated. In addition to their own part, the name would also include the holy name of the family, the achievements of the ancestors, and the names of the heroes of the past. Sometimes there might be more than one. In addition, there are all kinds of messy titles and positions. Sometimes it would take at least half an hour to write the name of a noble blood. It cannot be described as a waste of time. After 2 armies exchanged names in front of the battlefield, they might even need to drink some saliva to moisten their throats. Therefore, when communicating with outsiders in informal situations, they would usually use a simpler name. And now, Sandra, who was driving in front of Huaishur, was one of them, and her status was not low. Simply put, she was Liz's distant cousin. If her status was noble, then it was fine. The key was that her ability was equally amazing. At such a young age, she was already at the peak of rank 3. Moreover, she inherited one of the special stigmata of the American pedigree, the Heart of Mountain. Most of the time, it was called the Blessed Giant. As a descendant created by the first sun smoke mirror, it was born with a strong life force and strength. And the more important characteristic was its hardness. It was extremely hard. After various alchemy ceremonies and the inheritance of the ancestors, it also received the recognition of the heroic spirits of the ancestors. At the same time, it put on the legendary obsidian armor and also inherited the title of Jaguar Warrior. It was at the level of full defense. Even if it was Huaishur, if he did not use other powers and just used a Fong to hit her on the head, his hand would be numb. She might only be swollen, and it would disappear in a while. Unfortunately, Similar tests might have been done by others, and they were done a little too much, causing the child's brain to have some problems. Since childhood, except for physical education, she had never passed any exams. Other than scolding people, she could not learn any other foreign languages. If she did not use her ears as a unit of measurement, she might not even be able to do 4 calculations. Out of the importance of Huai Shi, when Richard arranged a position for him, he also matched such an adjutant to assist him, not only to help him understand the local situation, but also to make use of her advantages as a guard to protect his safety. As for whether Huai Shi needed it or not, that was another matter. Moreover, if she couldn't protect Huai Shi, wouldn't it be the same if Huai Shi protected her? Was it too easy to get points? No problem. Bring this Yao along. Obviously, Lao Xiong did not lose any hair because of her. When he found an opportunity, he simply sent the problem child out of the competition. However, after coming to the Tower of Glory, the two got along well. Huai Shi did not laugh at her learning. Secondly, he was good at cooking, which was much better than the canteen. Thirdly, there was nothing to do, and the crows could fight together. Sandra was so happy that she did not want to leave. As for fighting, Huai Shi did not count on her. It was not bad to keep her as a mascot. On the way back, Huai Shi, who was dozing off, heard a roar from afar. Amidst an earth-shattering boom, the earth trembled violently. Countless pieces of gravel flew up from the cracks. The massive and dignified tower moved on the earth, leaving behind deep cracks wherever it passed. But very quickly, the cracks closed up again. When a storm swept past, the Solano defense line had already undergone a drastic change. After the Feathered Serpent's approval, the Tower of Glory the Huai Shi was in had moved from the middle to the front. All the other towers and pyramids also began to move slowly on the ground. It was as if the chess pieces on a chessboard were being pushed by an invisible hand, forming a new outline. In order to deal with the rapidly increasing pressure, the Solano defense line gradually abandoned its original form of attack and no longer tried to radiate its influence to the entire border. It began to change to a purely defensive mode. Correspondingly, the darkness that was gradually surging in the Hell domain. Seizing the opportunity of the Solano defense line shrinking, it began to gradually expand outwards. In the next 2 days, the entire Solano defense line was shrouded in a huge roar and tremor. Reinforcement from America and the present territory arrived continuously. It was almost a change every day. In the end, even the sand that was originally flying everywhere disappeared. Under the transformation of the scholar's laws, the earth turned into the color of steel. Countless rainbows flowed in the sky, infusing the source substance and forming the framework. Before the surging undercurrent arrived, the drums of war had already been beaten. The flames in the Hell domain became more and more dazzling day by day. Countless volcanoes spewed out blazing light. Lava flowed, and disaster was expanding. Get ready. At the top of the Tower of Glory, Huai Shi looked at the dark domain that was covered by countless dark clouds. Before the main force arrives, the Demon Mountain Duke will not let us have an easy time. Although the military law in the Thunder Sea was the cruelest, at the same time, it was also more lax than other places the strongest was king. Worthless things did not even have the chance to be cannon fodder. As the commander of the vanguard, the Demon Mountain Duke had not done anything for such a long time. It would definitely affect his position in the Thunder Sea. Whether it was to fight for more power, to avoid being held accountable after the main force arrived, or to disrupt the present territory's steps so that they could not prepare for war calmly, he would definitely do something. In the past 2 days, Huai Shi's rain clouds had jumped around in front of him so many times and swallowed at least 4 settlements. But he did not react at all. He was either angered to death or was holding back his anger to do something ruthless. On the other hand, Huai Shi looked calm on the surface. In fact, he was starting to panic. Chapter 1195. Ever since he became an ascender, Huai Shi could be considered to have seen the world. From the beginning until now, he had fought from the present realm to hell and back again. He had secured so many victories and obtained so many results. Now, he could more or less be considered to be a top figure. However, he had never experienced such a huge battle. If things really came to a head, it would be a lie if he did not feel uneasy. During this period of time, he had been running all over the border, acting as a tool to put out fires everywhere. However, they were all urgent special missions, such as the defense of local conflicts, the transportation of confidential goods, the guarantee of supply of resources, the elimination of aerial threats. He was far from having that much experience in such a large-scale war. Even if he knew what he should do and understood how to deal with various situations, now was not the time to break through the defense line. He himself was the defense line, so how the hell was he going to break through? He had the geographical advantage, but he had lost the mobility that he had always been used to. It was impossible for him to just leave if he could not win. Even if the first sequence had dozens of support points now, and even without the Tower of Glory, it would not be in imminent danger. However, if he really lost such an important place, even if Huaishir did not die, he would probably have to pack his luggage and go home. In such a situation, it was natural for him to panic. It would be a problem if he did not panic. Anyone in Huaishir's position would have panicked as well. However, since Richard felt that he could do it, and the feathered serpent also felt that he could do it, he would not belittle himself and think that he did not have the ability to bear this responsibility. I'm Yin Zhongjuan, and I don't even need to pay to eat in a restaurant in the Gaia Fragment. What's wrong with eating a watermelon in the Thunderbolt Sea? Thus, the wind blew and the rain fell. The days passed as usual. Huaishir did not lack in the slightest. He was not afraid that the other party would target him and seek revenge in the future. Since he was already an MT, he had to pull the aggro more steadily. He was not afraid of the other party attacking him, but he was afraid that the other party would ignore him. As the first sequence of the Solano defense line, the important unit that faced the enemy directly at the front, the Tower of Glory, could not be left alone. Instead, it was directly connected to the defense line itself, forming a fulcrum of firepower like a bastion. Apart from the Guardian Huaishir and his mascot adjutant, there were also 6 scholars and 14 ascendants, as well as hundreds of soldiers. The scholars were responsible for maintaining the framework and laws of the tower. Apart from that, the Tower of Glory itself was responsible for ensuring the safety of the tower. All kinds of equipment and weapons were continuously moved into the tower and connected to the array, causing the dark clouds above the Tower of Glory to grow thicker and thicker. The tempest that Huaishir had been nurturing for half a month now had a faint scarlet color in the darkness. Even though it was suspended high in the sky, not moving at all, it still made people feel stifled and uneasy. However, to the Allies, this uneasiness was a source of stability. After all, the stronger their own people were, the safer they would be. Everyone knew that. However, the only inconvenience was that this damned place was too damp, in this hot and dry desert border. Except for the isolation room where important equipment was installed, the humidity in the Tower of Glory was almost off the charts. Moreover, there was a drizzle every hour. At night, there was no need to even keep watch because layers of white fog had completely engulfed the area around the Tower of Glory. During this period of time, the Crystal Squad had never been so comfortable. There was no need to patrol, no need to respond to signals and run hundreds or thousands of kilometers for emergency rescue, and no need to be suddenly awakened by alarms in the middle of the night. Even though the remaining tasks were equally heavy, compared to the previous days, it was as if they had stepped into a gentle retirement life in advance. Although they knew that war was close at hand, this group of heartless people still changed into underpants during their shifts and ran to the ditch behind the Tower of Glory to play diving. It was as if they had come to a water park. Although sometimes Sander would get too excited and evaporate half the water in the pond with a punch, blowing away the people in it. It was quite fun at other times. Sometimes at night, there would be other squads carrying beach chairs, stereos, and various other things over, and everyone would have a barbecue together. And at the top of the tower, Huaishir sat in his usual position, looking at the figures not far away who surrounded the fire and enjoyed beer, while quietly enjoying the wind. After a long time, he looked back at Crystal 1 to 7 behind him. "Are you sure you don't want to go down and take a look?" Crystal 1 to 7 shook his head silently and lowered his head to continue wiping his power armor. Ever since Huaishur helped him repair the damaged parts of the kinetic skeleton, he had been wiping this thing every day. Just like the bartender in the bar, he would never get tired of wiping it. As the captain of the squad, Crystal 1 to 7 had a prestige that was difficult for others to reach in the eyes of his own team members. Huaishur felt that even he might not be able to compare with him. After all, he was just a person who came out of nowhere, and Crystal 1 to 7, to them, was the officer who had accompanied him through fire and water and had saved him many times from quagmires. However, despite this, he still seemed to deliberately keep a distance from his team members and did not participate in their lives more deeply. Similarly, he also kept his own. He still maintained the work and rest habits of the former Crystal Squad. He did not slack off because he was the last survivor, but he also did not force the new team members to keep up with this set of overly harsh standards outside of the daily training. And those cumbersome armor maintenance and boring training day after day seemed to be the only link left between him and his former comrades who had passed away. For the rest of the time, he had nothing to do to kill time. It was as if he was waiting for something, waiting for war or death. "Do you want a can?" Huaishur took out a can of beer from a box at his feet. It was the offering that Sandra would occasionally remember that she still had a superior after looting the parties below. Now, Huaishur casually shook it, and a layer of ice crystals climbed onto the body of the bottle. It was cool and refreshing. Crystal 1 to 7 did not pretend to be indifferent. He took it, raised his head, and drank half of the can, and let out a long breath. "Phew, refreshing. Thank you, sir. Why do I always feel that you don't like to talk?" Huaishur asked curiously. "Is it my imagination?" "The rule of the Iron Cast Legion is silence, sir." Crystal 1 to 7 replied. "Soldiers only need to carry out orders and do not need to speak. From the beginning of the new recruit service until they are transferred to other departments, we have been taught this. They say that the more you speak, the more mistakes you make." Among the 4 major legions of the Astronomical Association, the Iron Cast Legion was the largest in number. It was even many times more than the other legions combined. Unlike the other legions with their own functions, the Iron Cast Legion did everything except for frontal assaults on the battlefield. They were like universal tools. They had the largest number of soldiers, and, at the same time, they sacrificed the most. Compared to Huaishur, a newcomer who came out of nowhere, they were the real veterans and the important cornerstone of the border defense line. Those wars and hardships did not defeat him. Even if the other victims had already passed away, Crystal Lattice 1 to 7 still retained some of the characteristics of the past. Calm and firm, like real steel, unshakable, even if the sky fell and the earth cracked. With such a companion, everyone would feel at ease from the bottom of their hearts. "To be honest, I originally wanted to let you relax a little, but you don't seem to need this boring care." Huaishur sighed and handed over another can of beer. "As half an old acquaintance, I want to do something for you, but I'm afraid you don't need it. So, I'm afraid the only thing I can guarantee is that beer is enough. Beer is enough." The corners of Crystal 1, 7's mouth seemed to curl up slightly. "Thank you for always remembering them, Mr. Huaishur." Huaishur did not answer, because he was not sure whether he remembered them or not. That was just a short encounter on the Stellaris. They wore combat goggles and masks, and their entire bodies were covered in armor, not revealing any part of their faces. In those 20 minutes, other than the logo on their shoulders, there was nothing left for Huaishur to remember. Now that he recalled, there was only one name left, Crystal Squad. They were 1 to 1 to 1 to 13. As for their names, gender, age, those materials had long been sealed in the secrecy administration of the Command and Control Bureau, waiting for the pile of old paper to wither and rot little by little. Perhaps one day, they would be able to see the light of day again after 60 or 70 years. Did this count as remembering? They were all nameless people, just like the people who had sacrificed themselves in the war, no different from the huge sacrifices of the past. It was difficult to even be remembered. It's really difficult to make people remember names. Huaisher sighed softly. Don't you feel sad? We didn't come here to be remembered, sir. Crystal 1 to 7 calmly replied. From the recruit camp to the Cast Iron Legion, we had 6 opportunities to quit, but there were very few people who gave up each time. My instructor once told me that there will always be an end, but sometimes the end will be more meaningful. He pulled open his collar, revealing the black tattoo on his collarbone, which made Huaisher stunned. Yu Dongri once told him that among the 4 great legions, apart from the orphans of martyrs, one of the most important sources of soldiers was the existence that was jokingly called the Atonement Army. The Command and Control Bureau had a department that was responsible for selecting people in the dark corners of the entire territory, opening the door for many prisoners and criminals. They would carefully evaluate the situation of each selected person, and if you were judged to be worth saving, then the doors of the 4 great legions would open to you, and you would have the opportunity to atone for your sins. Let your mud-like trash life once again have meaning. As you can see, I wasn't born a righteous person. Crystal 1 to 7 leaned against the armor behind him and whispered self-deprecatingly, I made some mistakes, some unforgivable mistakes, so much so that I lost everything. Some people told me that people can stand up again, but I don't believe it because things like forgiveness and rebirth are too far away for me. He paused and said seriously, but if there's a chance to become a hero, who wouldn't want it? Even if he was forgotten, it didn't matter. This was the first time Huaisher saw Crystal 1, 7 smile, so relieved that he was speechless. Yes, who wouldn't want it? Didn't he also have unrealistic dreams to reach where he was now? Let's drink to the heroes. He raised his beer. Cheers! Crystal 1 to 7 raised his beer and drank it in one gulp. Under the dark clouds, they quietly looked at the bonfire in the distance, shared the last of their beer, and enjoyed the last of their leisure and time. After a long time, the light of the bonfire gradually dimmed. Apart from the guards on duty, everyone fell into a deep sleep. And in the latter half of the night, Huaisher opened his eyes from the chair. The alarm sounded. The wind of war blew from the distance. Chapter 1196. At first, when the hurricane started, the sentries patrolling the defensive line thought that it was a normal change in weather. But when the high-pitched sound of the horn came from the wind, he could not help but change his expression and press the emergency alarm button. When the deployment of the Thunder Sea blew the call of conquest, it was the final declaration of the destruction of the army before they pressed on the border. They didn't hide their greedy ambitions and ferocious goals, and they empathized with the prophecy of destruction. Now, when the horn sounded, the darkness that had been suppressed in the corner of the border began to surge. It was as if it was boiling. Against the suppression of Solano's defensive line, it quickly surged, expanded, and expanded. It was as if a torrent of ink was about to dye the entire world black. A thick smell of blood gradually appeared in the wind, bringing with it the stench of decay and death. Continuous cracking sounds echoed in the air. It was as if an invisible fuse had been torn apart. It caused the earth to tremble abruptly. Dazzling radiance shot out from the cracks and rose towards the heavens. 1, 2, 3. Innumerable pillars of light stood before the expanding darkness like a cage, firmly suppressing the expansion of hell. However, very quickly, when the horn sounded from the lava and the mountains, the light barrier began to distort rapidly, as if it was being pulled by an invisible force. Then it completely collapsed. The weak light dissipated into the darkness, never to be seen again. The flood of disaster rushed straight in. At the peak of the mountains, the steel-like dwarf lifted the horn that was hundreds of meters long and blew it with all his might. His bulging chest gradually dried up, and his soul seemed to leave his body along with his breath. The bloodthirsty horn greedily absorbed the origin substance and disaster, causing the sound of destruction to echo. It moved forward, trampling on every soul, and even pulling. It pulled those souls into the eternal hole in the horn. Unfortunately, it was useless. Under the suppression of the 3 great seals, Even the might of the sea of lightning could not compare to the quality of the entire realm. Every soul that was connected to the Silver Ocean felt their minds sway when they heard the sound of the horn. However, only traces of source substance evaporated from their consciousness. Before they could dissipate, they were absorbed into Solano's framework under the support of the framework. Countless streaks of origin substance floated above Solano's defensive line, making half of the night sky seem even more dazzling. Just like the jewels on a beauty's neck. In the metal hall, the Archduke of the Demonic Mountain sat on his throne with his eyes lowered. His massive body was like a rock, and his eyes were filled with suppressed killing intent and greed. The time for punitive expedition has arrived. A deep voice echoed through the mountains. Take it and give it to me. As a result, the black tide between the mountains surged. Countless large groups of creatures roared and surged towards the light of the present realm amidst the sound of the horn. Right at the back of Solano's defense line, an ear-piercing alarm echoed. In a military intelligence room, continuous orders were sent out the moment the horn sounded. The entire silent defense line was operating with a low rumble. Blazing light rose into the sky, turning the night into day. The war plan was already in motion. Everything unfolded in an orderly manner. However, when everyone was rushing to exchange information, the chair in the middle was empty. Only the adjutant stood calmly beside the empty chair and used the authority of the commander to stamp Richard's emblem and seal on each order. Don't panic. The adjutant hugged his military cap. His white hair glowed with the color of iron under the light. His expression was calm. His Excellency has already given the order. Do what you need to do. I'll leave the matters here to you. As if they were already used to the unreliability of the adjutant, the subordinates shrugged with a bitter smile and threw themselves into the busy military intelligence and deployment. The entire base had been boiled into a pot of porridge by the invisible fire. The strict formation, the speeding convoy, and even those who carried heavy equipment to the front line were like blood flowing through the veins, rushing to their designated places. Now, in the empty dining hall after the lights were off, there was only a burly figure sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Quietly looking at the darkness and fire in the distant night sky, he smoked a cigarette calmly. Next to the ashtray on the table, there was a bottle of freshly opened tequila. The bear god Richard. What a good weather for hunting. The old man touched the short stubble on his chin and sighed. You think so too, don't you? Beside his feet, the exaggeratedly huge hammer vibrated excitedly. Wisps of scarlet seeped out from the runes. It could not wait any longer. Wait, baby. Richard stroked the handle of the hammer and whispered softly, wait a little longer. So he waited, and Huaisher was also waiting for the tide to swallow him. When the world of darkness stepped forward and all the darkness that could be seen from afar was coming toward him, the endless enemies gathered into formations, and the formations formed waves, and countless waves turned into tides. Galloping in the hurricane, he realized how small he was. Like dust. Is this war? At the top of the Tower of Glory, Huaisher sighed softly. It's so magnificent. It's so beautiful. Now, the darkness was rippling in front of him. Endless malice and calamity formed a tide of war, and the endless army of hell surged toward Solano. It stirred up a suffocating wind. In this brief moment of absent-mindedness, Huaisher could not help but feel an indescribable sense of beauty in this magnificent scene. It was as if F***CK. A shocked shout sounded in his ears. Chandra exclaimed in shock, "So many!" She paused for a moment, shocked by this magnificent scene, nodded, and added, "So many." In the silence, Huaisher looked back speechlessly and stopped talking. After a long time, he waved his hand helplessly. "Forget it. Let her be. As long as you're happy." In the stinking wind, a faint rumbling sound could be heard. Just in the middle of the tide, a huge silhouette slowly rose. Dozens of giant beasts that were hundreds of meters tall struggled to drill through the mud. Through the mud, they crossed a long distance and appeared again in the formation. Their half-human, half-beast posture was so ferocious. The moment they appeared, there was a fierce chill or fire spreading, shrouding their heads and feet. Mountain dragons. The demon dragon army, raised by the Grand Duke of Demon Mountain, had entered the battlefield. In one go, hundreds of mountain dragons that could destroy all the city walls were thrown into this attack. Now, the mountain dragons were slowly moving forward with their many giant legs and thick snake bellies. Under the protection of countless large groups, they approached the defense line step by step. 30 kilometers. In the observation room of the Tower of Glory, the engineering soldier shouted hoarsely. Fleischer was indifferent and did not move. But behind the Tower of Glory, the huge cannons that stood like a forest had already burst out with angry roars. On the ground, hundreds of beautiful flames grew in an instant. Heavy cannonballs cut through the night sky that was mixed with light and darkness, crossing a long distance and falling from the sky. Then, mushroom-like sparks grew out of the sticky and dark tide of hell. The spreading flames illuminated the ferocious faces. In the bloody wind, the large group became more and more restless and increased their speed. 20 kilometers under the long-range attacks of the cannons, countless mines buried in the ground were constantly triggered. Terrifying flame tornadoes rose from the ground. In the blink of an eye, countless large groups of people were engulfed and turned into ashes. But there were more waves coming out of the flames. The screaming monsters rolled on the ground and crawled with difficulty, not daring to slow down. And the trash that slowed down were completely trampled by the army and completely turned into mincemeat. At the front, the burning mountain dragon hissed, opened its mouth, and spat out flames. But then, the cannonballs from the sky pierced into the big mouth. After 2 flicks of the fingers in the expanding flames, the flesh bombs exploded and scarlet spread. The mutilated corpse fell. However, more thirsty monsters sped up. Just behind them, in the domain of hell, the huge cannons between the mountains also began to bombard the area without mercy. One by one, giant eyes opened from the secret apparatus. Strange rays of light and cannon fire crisscrossed in the night sky. The dazzling light brushed past the Tower of Glory and smashed into the defensive line, but was neutralized by the shield that suddenly rose up. Only the hurricanes swept through. 10-15 kilometers. The engineering soldier's voice began to tremble. In the eyes of ordinary people, the terrifying scale that was enough to make one's soul tremble had been completely included in the eyes. In the domain of hell, the lava in the mountains spewed out. Huge snakes, or strange bubble-like monsters, slowly crawled out of the volcanic craters, spread their wings, or stretched their bodies. They flew into the sky. Gradually, they covered the dark sky and sped towards Solano's defense line. They were even faster than the large groups that could only be used to attract firepower. Countless scarlet giant snakes with wings on their backs had already arrived at the defense line like lightning, hissing and spitting venom or breathing. Countless black dots crawled on their backs like ants. Now those black dots shook off their bodies and hissed at the enemies below, jumping out excitedly. Boom! A deafening explosion burst out from not far away. The Tower of Synergy. Before the approaching hell array, it finally couldn't help but fire the first shot. The frost spread all over the sky and instantly froze dozens of giant snakes, tearing their bodies apart. But there were more giant snakes coming from afar. 908, 8.4, 8.3, 8 kilometers. Fleischer was indifferent and did not move. The mutilated snake corpse fell in front of him. In a short moment, the shattered eyes reflected the expressionless face, only calmness. More giant towers shone and roared. After being given the freedom to fire, the moment the enemy touched the edge of the fire area, countless destructive lights sprinkled down towards the endless black tide. The Tower of Glory was silent. The surging dark clouds shrouded the top of the Tower of Glory, and wisps of scarlet appeared in the darkness. Under the light of countless rays and cannons, he looked down and watched the approaching black tide. The lighter turned slowly at the tip of his finger, like the needle of a clock. Waiting, More light and destruction sprinkled down from both sides, but the supporting cannons could not completely cover the gap in the Tower of Glory. Amidst the sirens, a puzzled voice came from the Tower of Flow. "Why sure? Why sure, are you there?" The voice echoed. "Please answer if you copy." "I'm here," Whisher said. "Everything is normal. Don't worry." "What are you still hesitating for?" The supporting allies asked angrily. "Stop dawdling. Don't worry. Wait a little longer." Whisher replied. "I suggest you wait a little longer too." "Wait?" At the top of the Tower of Flow, the middle-aged man paused for a moment and looked back in surprise. Dozens of kilometers away, he looked at Whisher's side profile. "Wait for what?" "Wait for the wind." Whisher looked back at him and answered softly. 3 kilometers. The report of the engineer was like a sharp cry, trembling. At that moment, the spinning lighter at Whisher's fingertip paused slightly. He looked up at the sky. Then the wind came. Above the vault of heaven, the huge rain clouds were emitting thunderous roars, as if they were alive. Under the will of Yun Zhongjuan, the hurricane that had been brewing for a long time burst out of thin air. Wild waves spread from the air and turned into a spreading gale. It swept up countless dust and sand and flew towards the tide in the distance. The tide, gathered by countless large groups of hell, paused for a moment under the blowing of the hurricane. But then, these insignificant difficulties were overcome. Compared to the harsh weather in hell, it was simply a breeze. The sound of fighting to their hearts' content rang out in front of them. Amidst their frenzied cries, they madly charged forward, brandishing their sharp claws and swords. Countless monsters surged forward. Then, without a sound, they collapsed. Like a field of wheat in the wind, ripples of destruction rose up, because the wind of death was blowing. The wind blew for tens of thousands of kilometers. When the visible wind blew along the entire line of defense, the invisible wind caused the tide of hell to turn into stagnant water. Countless strains of bacteria began to rapidly multiply and mutate amidst the blood and origin substances of the calamity. They took root in every body of flesh and soul, quickly spreading throughout the area. The invisible tide of plague had already been swept up by the hurricane, enveloping countless large groups. From the droplets, from the blood, from the breathing, from the sight, and from the will, the tide of plague was madly increasing at an exponential rate. Over the past half a month, after collecting countless deaths and fresh blood, the vicious poison in the dark clouds had now transformed into an invisible tide that flowed against the tide, covering everything in sight. It caused breathing to stop, the heart to stop, the lungs to stiffen, and the blood to congeal. Death. The invisible death spread. 1-2. For it, the rapidly decaying monsters expanded and exploded at a rate visible to the naked eye. Immediately after, countless grass seeds took root, grew, and sprouted from the flesh. Green grass and flowers bloomed everywhere. The cruel battlefield turned into a gentle paradise. Everything was as beautiful as heaven. A refreshing fragrance spread between the white bones and the scarlet. Colorful fungi crawled over the waxy faces as pestilence, dressed in colorful clothes, walked through the garden of death, smiling brightly at the tourists who stepped into it. Meanwhile, at the Solano line of defense, the first line of defense fell into silence. The enemies who had originally been at the city gates were silently annihilated in an instant, and the chain of disasters continued to spread among the countless large groups. For the time being, there was no need to open fire. At this moment, everyone looked around in shock at the terrifying scene of death spreading silently. They also looked at the Tower of Glory and the young man's smiling face as he looked down. They felt a chill run down their spines. Damn it, which side was hell? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.